If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. For truckers and people who drive overnight through forests, dark, and haunted roads, what is the scariest paranormal encounter, cryptid, or strange experience you've had in the middle of nowhere? Wyoming. Not my story, but I have a good friend that's from Casper. He was telling me that when he was in high school, he and his buddies went up at night to hang out, I guess. Well, at some point they were getting a weird feeling and got back in the car. After they got in, they felt something hit the trunk and could see a shadow of what looked like a person in the brake lights. They gassed it, and it chased after them, keeping up. It then somehow disappeared, but they could see a ridge on one of the sides of the car. Now, going about 40 down this dirt road, they could see a humanoid figure running along the ridge, keeping up with the car. They eventually got around a bend or something, and it totally disappeared. Obviously, I'm missing many small details about it because he told this to me a while ago, but after he told me it, I was freaked out. I'm also very terrified of walkers, and he believes that's what they experienced. Alien or odd otherworldly / dimension / spiritual creature. I took a road trip recently and ran into a mystical homeless man with knowledge he had no way of knowing. I flew to Oz from Eel to pick up a truck from my brother. The plan was to fly in Thursday, we road trip it back together Friday morning, and get home to Eel Sunday night. Obviously not non-stop. Well, Saturday was our long day of driving, 13 hours. At around 1145 p.m., almost outside the border of Texas near Oklahoma, it was my turn driving, and my brother was asleep. It's pitch black out there on the roads if you've never been. I had to use the bathroom so badly and needed a stretch, so I decided to stop. I stopped at an almost deserted but well-lit truck stop right off the highway. Go inside, come back out, and there is an older, dirty, homeless-looking man with very beautiful green eyes. Gives me a friendly wave and shuffles over. I'm very paranoid and always defensive, so I kept my distance as he shuffled over. He looked at me and said, "Good luck on your trip." I just smiled and nodded my head to be polite. Now the truck did have Arizona license plates, and you could see our backpacks in the back seat if you looked in, but what he said next is the freaky part. He looked me over, sniffed the air, and said, "Ah yes, you're from Illinois. You'll make it there," and shuffled off across this truck stop with a smile. I was wearing a Waylon Jennings t-shirt. None of my clothing, keys, or vehicle had any inclination of where we were going other than the license plate on the back that was from Arizona. That creeped me out enough to wake me back up for the next couple hours until our next rest stop. Edgeray, West Virginia. One night a few years ago, my friend, who is driving, and I were taking his girlfriend home when he decided to take the long way home. As we are driving along this fairly deserted back road, I begin to zone out, and I stare at this blinking red light off in the distance and casually think to myself, I wonder when they built a cell phone tower all the way out here. When suddenly it blinks and is dramatically closer than it was just a moment earlier. At this point my friend points it out and stops in the road. It blinks once more and is directly in front and over top of us. The red light is so bright it floods the car in a deep scarlet hue. I lean forward so that I can see directly into the light, and in that brief moment I feel a flood of negative emotions. The closest description I can offer is that of being naked under a giant microscope and having every pore examined thoroughly. I then look away from the light to my friend and ask him to drive. He barely responds, apparently in a similar state. Then he snaps out of it and starts driving. As we get a little ways down the road, I notice the red light isn't fading and the interior of the car is still clearly lit by it. I look out the window, and to my horror, the light is following us and does so for approximately 1 to 2 miles. The light unexpectedly veers off to the left and comes down to ground level in a patch of trees adjacent to the road. My friend stops the car again and continues to stare at it and abruptly declares he is going to get out and look at it like he is in some sort of trance. He opens the door, and I grab his arm and tell him if he does, I will get in the driver's seat and leave him, that we had to leave that instant. He looks at me and seems to come to and punches the gas so hard the tires lose traction and spin. The light remained stationary as we rode away, but I've never looked at the night sky the same. The Medicine Bow Road to Casper from Laramie. I was coming back with my brother when we saw hundreds of red lights that acted and looked like drones but had no sound. They also could keep up with us going 80 miles per hour. We came over a hill, and hundreds of them were shooting up from one spot, like one of those fireworks that shoot up hundreds of shots. But no sound. My brother has the video somewhere on his phone. We also have a lot of buddies who have seen odd things on that road. One of his friends swore they saw a holographic deer. Spooky road. I was traveling back home with my mom from my aunt's house on a warm, sunny afternoon. While I was sitting in the passenger seat, an object just appeared in the sky a little to our left. We both saw it immediately. The size of it is what was shocking more than anything. It had the classic saucer shape and was shining brightly because the sun was reflecting off of it. We continued driving down the road for a few seconds, just admiring this craft, when all of a sudden we saw something I still don't believe to this day. It just vanishes. Disintegrates. Disappears. Whatever you want to call it. I looked back at my mom, and I could tell by her expression she had seen the same thing. Since this sighting, I have always been interested in UFOs and the possibility of other life in our universe. This object in the sky was definitely not a helicopter, airplane, or flock of Jesus. My mom and I still talk about the sighting we had and can't come up with a reasonable explanation as to what we saw that day. This is my UFO story, and it is not a hoax or fabrication. Everyone always laughs at me when I tell this story, but that's fine. I know what I saw. I work as a truck driver and often drive at night. One night, around 2 a.m. in December, I was driving along a dark country road at a speed of about 45 miles per hour. As I entered the freeway, I spotted a man in his 40s who was holding his thumb up. He gave me a look as if he were begging for a lift. I said I could take him to the next town because it was my stop, and he fell back into the seat, seemingly relaxed. I start talking to this guy, asking where he was trying to get to, and I turned the radio down a little as I thought he couldn't hear me. He looked and said nothing. I thought I couldn't talk, so he smiled, and I was not showing a sign of feeling disgruntled. So about a mile down the road, there was a terrible smell like he dropped his guts. I look over to say that it's rather rude to do that. I had to double take, as the guy was not in the seat. I thought maybe he climbed on the bed, so I turned the cabin light on, and he wasn't there. He disappeared. I never worked nights during that shift. When I got back to base, my colleague said you look like you've seen a ghost. So I grew up in the woods and have many stories about strange goings on. But this one happened a few weeks ago, and this seemed like a good place to put this. I had just left my mother's house and was driving back to mine down a back road I've driven down many times before. I knew this road like the back of my hand and could drive down it with my eyes closed in reverse. No, I haven't actually done that. As I was getting to the halfway point down this road, there was a thick fog, which is nothing new as there is fog on this road all the time. However, I was driving slowly and starting to take turns I don't remember. There was a 90 degrees right when it should have been left, followed by a wide left turn that felt like a full circle. Then I drove straight for about 5 minutes with no hills or drops, and that road never has a flat section that long. There was then a left turn up a hill. As I was going up, all the hair stood up on my body, and I almost turned around there, but I decided to keep going, because I don't know why. This is when I pulled my gun from my glove box and had it on my lap. When I looked back to the road, some dude was just crouched in the middle of the road. I slammed on my brakes, and he didn't even flinch. I figured it was just some dude going frog hunting or some shit, as many people on that road do just that. I honked my horn, and the guy stood up. He was massive, like at least 7.5 feet tall, thin as a mother, and his arms were just too long. It looked like he didn't have any clothes on either. I laid on the horn again and clicked of the safety on my pistol just in case. He turned his head what seemed like almost a full 180. And his eyes had that predatory glow, like a wolf or a cat, and I raised my gun and leaned out the window, telling him to get lost. He took a few steps toward me. And I know this was stupid, but I tried to pull the trigger, and my gun just didn't fire. The hammer clicked, and no boom. I whipped the car around faster than I've ever done before. I then just flew down the road at least 20 miles per hour over the speed limit. About 30 seconds after I turned around, I realized that I recognized all the turns and hills. I was driving down the road like I had never taken that first right. I went back during the day and still don't know where I took a wrong turn. There are no side streets down that road that are paved and certainly no straightaway as long as the one I drove. I went to the range a day or two later and put that same round in the chamber, and it fired no problem. I have no idea what happened. I also don't drive that way at night anymore. Please tell me someone knows what I saw. None of my friends believe me, and even my mother doesn't. I know I'm not crazy. I know this happened. This is really ducking with me. I work for a trash company in a very rural part of Pennsylvania, so my days start as early as 2 a.m. during the summer of last year. I was driving down a backcountry road around 3 in the morning when I came across someone in a hoodie sitting in the middle of the road. They refused to move and didn't even bother looking up at me, even when I was blowing the air horn at them. I sat there for about a good minute before I started really thinking about why this person was sitting in the road. I threw it in reverse and got the F out. To this day I have no explanation for it, and I didn't want to stick around to find out. Clinton Road, New Jersey. I was 20 and back home in NJ on my summer break from college. I decided to meet up with my friend Gabby. Our usual routine was to smoke some J's and go for a drive. We normally just did loops around the lake behind her house, but this night, I was driving, and we decided we would go to the diner. At about 11 p.m. we decided to head out. We put on some music and set the GPS to bring us to the diner, and we began our smoke session. Just as we finished smoking, we made the turn onto Clinton Road. It seemed like a normal road at first, albeit very narrow. It's one lane in each direction with no shoulders. To the left is a steep downhill drop into the woods, while on the right side it is an uphill scale into the woods. There are no street lights. There are no exits on Clinton Road, no side streets to turn onto, or areas where the road widened so you could pull over. The stretch of road goes for about 20 miles. Keep in mind that this road is in the woods of NJ. At 11 p.m., there was absolutely no one else out driving. The speed limit was 25, and I was doing 30 in my old Jeep Wrangler. We had been on the road for about 5 miles, cruising and laughing, when out of nowhere a large truck appeared behind me with blinking headlights. The headlights were so bright, my friend and I could not logically understand how the truck was able to just materialize behind us without us noticing. Yet there it was, riding my ass so close that I had to hit the gas to put some distance between us. The anxiety took over my whole body as I realized there was nowhere for me to go but to continue straight on and get to the end of the road. I checked my speedometer, 45 miles per hour, and this guy was still right on our tail. The lights were so blinding it was hard to see the road in front of me. My heart was racing. Gabby, I can't handle this. I need to pull over before we crash. The road is too narrow, and I can barely see, and I can't just keep going faster. What do we do? I was freaking out. Gabby told me she didn't think there was much we could do but to keep going. And she was right. I was now going 55 miles per hour in a 25, on a tiny road with no street lights, and I thought at any moment I could veer off the cliff or be rear-ended by this asshole. I continued straight while constantly searching and hoping for a side street to appear so I could let this jerk pass. And then, miraculously, as we approached the end of Clinton Road, the truck was gone. There was nowhere it could have gone, but it had disappeared. We finally got to the freaking diner, and I was in no mood to eat. Instead, I did some Googling and discovered that Clinton Road is a well-documented haunted street. Multiple people have recounted their experiences of the ghost truck almost running them off the road. It's even in the weird NJ books. I am just glad I survived to tell the tale. If you're ever in NJ, don't take Clinton Road at night. So back in 2007, some friends and I were out exploring in Maryland. We were living in the DC area at the time and would try to pick different places to explore. This particular trip we had spent the previous day and night looking for the Blair Witch House near Burkittsville, Maryland. We didn't find any witch houses in the woods, but what we did encounter was quite puzzling. It's an old rail town, so the houses all look similar to give off those spooky vibes, and this was around late fall, maybe near Thanksgiving. So it's around dinner time, it's dark out that time of year, and we were passing through the town to head back home, and that's when things got weird. I was driving and had 2 friends with me. They're both talking and looking out the windows. I'm looking around too and driving pretty slowly since we were in the town, but then it hit us, we were the only people around. There were cars parked and lights on in several homes, but we didn't see any people. It was crazy as we slowly kept going but never encountered another person in town that night. Not even a moving vehicle or a person walking a dog. Normally you can see someone walking by a window of a building if the lights are on, but we didn't even see that. It was about 5 minutes or so down the road outside of town before we started seeing people and moving cars again. We all thought it was weird, but we were dumb kids at the time, so we made jokes and the usual to deflect from the unsettling feeling that place brought. Years passed. I remained friends with one of the guys, and we talked about that night, but we couldn't agree on a theory. He thought we might have seen a bleed through of another dimension, like Fringe, which nowadays I'm more likely to believe. I thought we came across one of those fake government towns like out in Nevada, and there were experiments or something going on. In the end, maybe it was nothing but just dumb luck that we didn't see any people, but it remains a mystery in my life. I've never driven back through Burkittsville, Maryland, but perhaps someone else will and experience something similar. The Dover Demon. Dover, 29 years later, William Bartlett stands by his story of what he saw on Farm Street that night. It was an eerie human-like creature, he said, about 4 feet tall with glowing orange eyes and no nose or mouth and a watermelon-shaped head. I have no idea what it was, Bartlett, now a 46-year-old artist living in Needham, said in a recent interview. I definitely know I saw something. The Dover demon that Bartlett and two other teenagers reported seeing over a 2-day span in April 1977 has since gained worldwide attention, not unlike Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and the Latin American goat sucker, the chupacabra. Internet pages are devoted to the Dover demon. You can play a video game featuring the creature or buy a figurine of it as far away as Japan. In a lot of ways, it's kind of embarrassing to me, said Bartlett. I definitely saw something. It was definitely weird. I didn't make it up. Sometimes I wish I had. He has made a career as a painter, his work displayed in galleries on both coasts, but a search on Bill Bartlett, he noted, invariably turns up his teenage encounter with the unknown. Once, his wife, Gwen, browsing the horror section of a bookstore, flipped open an encyclopedia of monsters, and there was an entry about her husband and the Dover demon. It's a thing that's been following me for years, Bartlett said. Not the creature, the story. Sometimes I dread every Halloween getting calls about it. On April 21, 1977, Bartlett, then 17, was driving along Farm Street at around 10 p.m. when, he said, he saw the creature atop a broken stone wall. 2 hours later, according to news accounts from that time, John Baxter, 15, was walking home from his girlfriend's house when he got within 15 feet of the creature along a creek in a heavily wooded area along Miller Hill Road. At midnight the next night, Abby Brabham, 15, was driving home with her boyfriend when she spotted the creature sitting upright on Springdale Avenue. A drawing made by Baxter showed a humanoid figure with large eyes standing by a tree. Bartlett's large-eyed creature crawled with tendril-like fingers across a stone wall. I, Bill Bartlett, swear on a stack of Bibles that I saw this creature, he wrote on the sketch. The locations of the sightings, plotted on a map, lay in a straight line over 2 ash miles. All the sightings were made in the vicinity of water. No sightings have been reported since, though Bartlett says a weird experience a year later left him wondering if he had had a return visit from the creature. The following year, he said, he was in a parked car with his girlfriend when he heard a thump on the car. He saw a small figure fleeing the scene. He still doesn't know who or what caused the car to crash, but he speculated that it might have been a young person playing a practical joke. Farm Street on a recent evening could have been a modern-day Sleepy Hollow, with woods lining the fieldstone walls and what little light there was coming from the moon. Since at least the 17th century, the vicinity of the second oldest road in Dover has been associated with strange occurrences. Not a trucker, but more of a story of a creepy trucker. Background: I was a hitchhiker one summer, and I decided to hitchhike from Quebec City to Cochrane, Ontario, then back down to North Bay. This happened in 1999, and I was 18 and a big kid, but still very much a kid. I hadn't had a lot of luck this night, so I was walking around midnight down the highway when a truck pulled over and picked me up. Buddy was not Canadian but was from somewhere in the US. This guy starts rambling, finally having an audience. He just goes on and on about people who have wronged him and pissed him off. Then he talks about having shot a guy once. Some guy who was harassing his mother made him so mad he up and shot him. Not dead, just wounded. I'm just the audience to this, and it was his time to shine, and shine me on and on. Then he goes on about how much he loves his children. He alternates between speaking of them warmly and lovingly and speaking about how angry he'd be if anyone messed with them. Then, without taking his hands off the wheel and still driving, he turns his head to me, locks eye contact, and says, "I'll duck and kill anyone who messes with my kids." And just holds the stare with me. Again, I'm 18. I'm a kid myself. He felt very much like he was threatening my life, even though we're like 1500 km from his kids, in the middle of literally nowhere. I didn't know how he was doing it, driving just fine while not looking at the road at all to make some point to me that was very important for me to hear. I began to get really nervous about all this. I asked him to pull over and let me out. Whatever the night held for me was going to be way less scary than this madman. Anyway, that's the story. It ends with me trying to catch some shut-eye in a ditch before a grandfatherly trucker from South Carolina pulled over and begged me to ride with him so I wouldn't freeze. I could barely understand this guy, his South was so thick in his speech, but man, oh man, was he nice and kind, full of stories of pride for his grandchildren. He took me all the way to North Bay. So me and my friend Trevor were going out to what was apparently the most haunted road in western New York. Although both of us have been to the road before, just not with each other. Trevor said he's heard some crazy shit on the road when he went, but I, on the other hand, have not. Trevor's had plenty of wacky ghostly happenings all throughout his life, and he believes that there's a spirit attached to him or something along those lines. But let me tell you about this road, I don't know too much, this is just what my friends have told me and what I've read online. It's old and very long, no street lights, tons of trees following the road, and some creepy hidden paths in the woods. Apparently people have seen a little girl, some horse dog type thing, and an old man walking around with a lantern. There's also supposedly an old church somewhere in the woods that was burned down. Yeah, that's about it. Anyways, we were driving up and down the road to make sure there were no serial killers or monsters. I was paranoid. Okay, I may not be a big believer, but I get the creeps, when this car drove by us. The thing is, just before we passed them, a black figure darts behind their car and just vanishes into the darkness. I couldn't believe my eyes. I hit the brakes as an immediate reaction, thinking I was about to hit a deer or something, but again, there was nothing to hit, literally disappeared in front of us. Trevor saw it, I saw it, and the car next to us slammed on their brakes too and screamed, "What the duck was that?" So I'm sure as hell assuming they saw something in their mirrors. I tried rationalizing, and we continued driving down the road, decided to park and turn off the car and the lights. We were trying to get an EVP, so we needed silence and didn't want to kill my car battery, so we brought out flashlights. Nothing came up, so we just started walking down the road, listening and looking around us for any sign of paranormal activity. We get about 10 feet from my car when my freaking car doors just locked, clear as day you could hear it just click. All 4 doors. Of course Trevor heard it too. We ran back to the car, and sure enough, every door was locked. I did not touch my keys, they were wrapped around my neck with a lanyard. Nothing was near my neck, nothing bumped the buttons or anything. We both hopped in and skirted off. Finally, as we get towards the middle of the road, I calm down and pull over again just so I didn't have a panic attack because what? We're sitting there in my car, I'm looking down the road, and he's looking next to us, flashing his light being all sketched out. I guess his flashlight kept flickering on and off, but that can easily be explained by old batteries, probably. I shit you not, I saw what looked like a lantern. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but I saw something. Just as the light goes off into the woods, I turned to Trevor to see if he saw it too, and just before anything comes out of his mouth, we both hear what sounded like someone walking in the woods right next to us. I turned my car back on and off we went. Away from that damn road. Once I grow some more balls, we're bringing more people, and we're going back to Delaware Road. I might even go down the trails and look for the church or what's left of the church. This story happened on New Year's Eve 2010. I'm visiting my friends in our city before me and my family start our New Year's Eve celebration. Suddenly, I received a phone call from my uncle. My uncle asked me if I could visit them before our New Year's Eve celebration starts. My uncle lives in the countryside of my city. I said yes, and I asked my friend if she could come with me. My friend agreed, so we left our city around 9:30 p.m. on my motorcycle. We arrived at my uncle's house at 10 p.m. My uncle is very happy. We talk, we eat and drink. But I don't drink that much because I'm going to drive back home. Me and my friend spent a good amount of time there when I noticed that it was already 11:30 p.m. So we just got 30 minutes to go back to our city. We inform my uncle that we are heading home. And we start traveling back home. But we just got 30 minutes before New Year's Eve start. Because that thing is moving, it looks like it's moving. So I stopped my motorcycle to take a closer look at that thing or whatever it is, and then I was shocked, scared, and trembling in fear. When I looked in the middle of the rice field, I saw a big horse. Tall as a tree, but this horse is not walking on 4 legs, it's walking on 2 legs with hands like a human. The creature is looking in the sky in the direction of the fireworks. So I start my motorcycle and just hit the gas on it. My friend is screaming, and I'm so scared. While we were getting out of that place. When me and my friend are near our city. A strong gust of wind hit us. We almost fell to the ground, then my motorcycle stopped working. I tried to start it a couple of times, but it's not starting. We're in our city, so we decided to leave my motorcycle at the auto repair shop because it was New Year's Eve and no one was there to repair it. So we went home that night. In the morning, I came back to the auto repair shop for my motorcycle. But the mechanic asked me what happened to my motorcycle, and I answered, "Why? What's the problem with my motorcycle?" The mechanic told me that I need to pay a large amount of money to repair a motorcycle that was hit by lightning. He told me that all of my motorcycle's electrical parts were burned and needed to be replaced, and he showed me all of them. And again I felt scared because me and my friend were sitting in that motorcycle at that time it stopped. There is no way it was hit by lightning. Until this day, I could not explain what I saw and what happened to my motorcycle that night. But whatever it is, one thing is for sure, the thing that I saw in the rice field that New Year's Eve is not human. I have a story that still haunts me to this day. I play it repeatedly in my mind, still trying to figure out if it was a Bigfoot or something of alien nature. Here is my story. I grew up on a road called Devil's Backbone Road back in the day. It was a rural route located in Putnam County, Indiana. Everyone in the Mount Meridian area knew it as Devil's Backbone Road, though. The name of the road alone will leave you scratching your head. The road is a gravel road nestled in the country. It has 2 creeks, one large iron bridge, and one smaller iron bridge. My brother and I played in the creeks and the woods our entire childhood. I am not going to say that I did not feel followed a time or two in the woods, because I certainly did, and can remember running out of the woods once while morel mushroom hunting to knowing I was being followed. In 1992, I was coming home from work. It was a warm May night. I worked the closing shift at a local fast food restaurant. At the time I was driving a '78 4-door Impala that had been my great-aunt's due to I had totaled my brand new truck on an icy road a few months prior. This old car was a jewel. It had a few tires on it that were not even the right size, but it got me back and forth to school and work while my truck was in the shop. There is a point in telling you what I was driving with me. I would say it was between 11:30 p.m. and midnight. When you are coming from the local town of Greencastle and turn on the road that I grew up on, the first bridge you would come to is the Big Iron Bridge, and once you cross it, there is an S-curve that turns to the right, then the road straightens out just for a second, then curves back to the left. I grew up being told that at the second curve, if you followed it straight, there are Indian mounds on that land. I never explored it though. Once I crossed the Big Iron Bridge, I noticed bright lights on the bend past the second curve. In my mind, I was wondering why someone would be stopped there and was just wondering what was going on. I was a little nervous because it is a very dark area and not somewhere you would want to be stopping in the middle of the night when you are an 18-year-old young lady. I approached the second curve slowly to be sure I was not going to round it and hit another vehicle. When I got around the curve, I noticed that the bright lights were 2 lights coming from next to a very large sycamore tree that has to be several hundred years old. I have been looking to my right through the passenger window the whole time and am still driving very slowly, trying to figure out what was putting off the light. As I am looking through the window, it looks to be a very large creature squatted down in the weeds. My mind immediately thought it was a Bigfoot due to its size. It was so large that the weeds, which I would say were waist high, did not even hide it. The eyes were oval but the size of a softball. Just to give you a visual of the size, the light coming from the eyes was so intense that they lit up the whole area. I was watching it as I drove by, but it was watching me as I passed, turning its head to follow my car. I could see in my rearview mirror that it had turned and was still watching me on the straightaway headed toward the second bridge. Once I cleared the area, I mashed the gas pedal to the floor, praying that the old car would get me out of there as fast and safely as possible. I crossed the second smaller iron bridge and then a very steep hill, which to this day is very dangerous if you lose control of your vehicle for going to a ride down some very steep cliffs. I flew the rest of the way home, maybe 2 to 2.5 miles. Now I'm going to tell you about the house I grew up in. Bedtime was at 9 p.m. every night unless you were at work. No phone calls after 8 p.m. If someone was calling, it better be an emergency. Needless to say, you did not dare wake my dad up. There were 2 doors on the house at the time that you could use to get in, one off the front porch and one off the kitchen. I started screaming for my dad before I even got out of the car. In my mind, that creature was right behind me or already in the yard. I screamed for my dad as I ran into the house through the front porch door because I did not dare try to make it around the house to get in the back door. Dad came flying out of the bedroom. I was honestly hysterical, screaming for him to get his gun. When I explained to him what I saw, all he said was, "Oh, you are fine, you have seen him before, he will not hurt you. Just sit down and calm down. Don't you remember seeing him in the creek once?" I do remember asking him when I was little about the large man that was running as fast as the truck in the creek, but that is all I remember of that. I calmed down and made my way upstairs to my bedroom, and my brother came out of his room whispering to me, wanting to know what was going on or had happened. I told him, and he was as scared as I was at the time. Neither of us slept a wink that night. Later, I would find out that my dad was scared because he had told every neighbor on the road. Now that old sycamore tree is known as the Bigfoot tree. I have heard a few of the hunters back then have also seen something they would call a Bigfoot. I have watched and listened to many stories about Bigfoot, and never do I hear of the eyes being that large and glowing like bright lights. Since then, I have experienced many paranormal events that I cannot explain. This, though, is one of my top 2 unexplainable events. Driving late at night. I had an incident that happened about a year ago that scared the shit out of me. For privacy reasons, the most I can tell you is that it happened in Indiana. This is a legit story. I'm not going to tell you that Bigfoot ran out of the woods and punched out one of my windows. I didn't box an evil leprechaun from another dimension to save my captured girlfriend. I just saw something that really freaked me out, and I feel like I have to share this here. Before I tell you about the incident, I need to explain why my best friend's grandparents' neighborhood has always spooked me. I'll call my buddy Steve. Steve's grandparents lived about 25 minutes out of town. There are probably about 10 houses in the area. Each house is surrounded by ominous-looking trees. The jagged branches stick out like they are hands reaching out for you. It's kind of a swampy area with very little lighting around. The lack of lighting makes everything invisible in the woods surrounding the houses. It is literally straight out of a horror movie. This would be enough to scare some people, but there have also been some disturbing occurrences. A while ago, there was a man that was tied to a chair in an abandoned house, and someone set the house on fire. I was skeptical when Steve told me about it, but even his grandparents told me the same thing. One day, while driving to his grandparents' house, he showed me the burned remains of the house. As if that didn't give off enough bad vibes, a lady hung herself in her front yard after sending her kids to school one day. It's just a downright creepy/sketchy place to drive to at night. Steve had been staying at his grandma's house for about a week because his grandparents were visiting relatives in Arkansas. This provided the perfect chance to drink and basically do what we want. Now that you basically have the backstory, I'll get to what happened. Well, one night Steve texts me and asks if I want to come over and hang out. It was late November and a little after 10:30. It was late, but I'm a bit of a night owl, so I didn't mind. I told him to give me a few minutes, and I'd head over. Assuming that he is still at his grandma's, I start heading that way. I drive all the way to his grandma's house and realize all of the lights inside the house were off. Confused, I whip out my phone and text Steve. Me, hey, you are at your grandma's, right? Steve, nope, my house. Me, WTF, I just drove all the way out here, you could have told me. Steve, sorry, man, just hurry up and get over here. I got something I gotta tell you. Steve had been trying to get with a girl he had liked for a long time. He's really bad with talking with the ladies, though, so he's been asking me for advice. That had to be what this was all about. I chuckled while shaking my head. Put my car in reverse and called Steve a dumbass under my breath. I began to head back, and then my phone rang. It was Steve. I answered it, and he began to give me some details about the girl situation. I stopped at a four-way stop and listened to Steve ramble on and on. I sat there for some time listening to Steve get all pumped up about his recent success. I finally looked up, turned left, and saw something. It appeared to be a shadow in the front yard of an old house. I had no clue someone even lived in the house. The shadow was very close to the road. OSHT, some guy is standing in his front yard looking at me. I laughed. He's probably wondering why the hell I'm just sitting here at the stop sign. My car radio showed that I had been stopped at the stop sign for about 5 minutes, so I could imagine I seemed sketchy. I began to turn my car left. My headlights illuminated the shadow, and I became very serious. My headlights revealed an old lady standing there with her hands folded as if she were praying. She was looking down, and her mouth was moving quick. I couldn't make out anything she was saying at all. Her mouth was just moving 100 miles an hour, and she seemed like she was in a trance. She was probably 5 feet from my car. I sat there and stared. It was probably 10 degrees outside, and all that she was wearing was a gray dress. My headlights were directly on her, and she didn't even look up. I didn't know what to do exactly. At first I was concerned for the old lady, but the more she stood there, the more the hair stood on the back of my neck. Steve realized I hadn't said anything for a few minutes. Steve, you still there? Me, dude, this old lady is just standing here. Steve, what is she doing, ha? She's just praying right by the road, I said. Steve, what the hell, it's almost midnight, is she okay? Me, whether it was the lady's ghost, a demon, or just some really weird old lady that decided to pray by the road at midnight in 10-degree weather, it scared the shit out of me. Hopefully it was the last one. Now I take a different way to Steve's grandma's if I go there at night. Just remember, if you guys somehow stumble upon the same neighborhood, don't stop for the old lady. While discussing some paranormal topics with my partner, he brought up a story about a friend of his dad. We will refer to this friend as X, and my partner's dad as Y. This experience took place in Puerto Rico. X and Y were out during the night, and they were passing through this road. The road had 1 lane per direction, so it was 2 lanes in total. Right next to this road there was a beach. They were both going at about 80 to 90 miles per hour. X was in the lane he was supposed to, and Y was going on the opposite side of the road. This was late at night, so the street was empty. X was behind Y, and then Y noticed that X started speeding more than they planned on, but either way Y followed him and did the same. When they arrived at their destination, X mentioned that there was this humanoid creature that was running alongside his car, so he sped so that he could escape from whatever that was. This is when Y realizes that like a minute before C had sped up, he saw kind of like two glowing eyes, like a dog or a cat when you point a flash at them, following them, but he shrugged it off, thinking it was a power pole or something. As soon as my partner told me this experience, I felt some sort of familiarity. I tried searching this online and I couldn't find any details about some type of humanoid creature known for doing this, so naturally I have hopped on here to see if I could find similar stories. Has this ever happened to you guys? Or anything similar? Could you identify what this creature might be? This happened in the past hour. I was headed home from work at around 11:40 p.m., after my shift. I've been working at my job for about a year and I've worked all 3 shifts at one point. It's safe to say I'm familiar with my route at all times of day or night. As I was driving down a dark secondary highway, no street lights and maybe a car every 10 minutes, I was coming up to a field on my left. Typically, I watch both sides of the road for any cars because I'd hate to accidentally run one over. I noticed on my left side what appeared to be a deer. My eyes darted to the left, then back to the road to make sure none were ahead. I had enough time to look again, but when I did, something just seemed off. The deer-like creature was bigger than a deer but nothing like a cow or a horse. It was inside the field on the other side of the fence, though I've never seen any livestock in that field anyway. The more I looked, the weirder it got. It was on all fours with the neck bent down to the ground as if it were grazing. It wasn't moving at all. Then I noticed the eyes, reflective of green and almost as if they were in the center front of the face and much too close together. I didn't have any high beams on, and the thought didn't occur to me until after, but I couldn't see any ears or antlers either. By this point I had driven past and couldn't observe any further. I was thinking back in my memory to the deer. My stomach felt like a knot, and I felt a sense of dread. I can't explain it. I'm not an easily spooked person, and I fall asleep to true crime on the regular, so the feeling was quite shocking. I don't quite know when the thoughts hit me, but I began thinking of the worst possible scenarios I could encounter on my remaining drive. Trying to think of what my closest landmarks were just in case. I didn't even realize I was doing this. The dread followed me through the rest of my drive. I still can't shake the feeling. I told my mom, she's staying with me for a bit, about it when I got home, and my whole body felt chilled. Just all goosebumps and creepies up my body to my neck. The whole experience was really unsettling. The backroads of the Texas Panhandle are terrifying at night. I have lived in Texas my whole life, and I have never been more scared of my home state than when I've driven through the backroads of the Amarillo area at night with my family. It is rare for me to be up there, seeing as I was born and raised in North Texas, but I can't forget those dark roads. I was reminded of just how scary the deserts and flatlands can be from seeing so many posts about the crazy shit that has gone down in Arizona. Now, I've nowhere near time jumped or gone through a town that doesn't exist, but it is eerily easy to get turned around and completely forget where you were up in the Panhandle. It feels like the land, and whatever is out there in it, is trying to make you get lost. As crazy as it sounds. I have a distinct memory of driving home from Colorado at night with my family. My younger brother and my mom were asleep while my dad drove. I was sitting in the back with my headphones in, watching the barely lit road through the windshield. It was quiet and calm, with no sign of anyone for miles. But, as my father crested a small hill, we sped past a figure, shadowed by the headlights just on the side of the road. It looked like a man, but all I could make out were its glowing eyes reflected back at us. I quickly took my headphones out to see if I could gauge a reaction from my father, but he seemed almost too calm. I chalked the first one up to being my imagination, telling myself I hadn't seen anything. That it was just a trick of the light, and I was paranoid. I won't ever forget turning my head to look out my window and seeing another shadowed figure with its glowing eyes as we drove past. It wasn't any closer than the one before, but it was clearly a humanoid, and it was undoubtedly present in the darkness. I was mortified. I didn't want to say anything to my dad to worry him while we drove, so I just shoved my head into the pillow that was in my arms and refused to look back up until we made it back to the hotel. I try to chalk that experience up to the delusions of a child with an active imagination, but I don't think I could ever actively drive those twisting roads alone at night. I can't say for sure what happened to me that night, but here is what I know. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to get home, and I left Bloomington around 10 p.m. At exactly 10:53 I am on a rural stretch of the 2-lane highway I take home, and I notice what appeared to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, great, I'm getting pulled over, so I turned onto the next country road about a quarter mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car stopped and I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof of insurance, the lights suddenly disappeared, and no car drove past. Now here is where the story takes a turn for the weird, and I am sure you guys will think I'm just making it all up because it really does seem like something straight out of a typical UFO movie or story. The electronics in my car started to go haywire. The radio was randomly changing stations while the volume kept going up and down while the dome light and headlights started to flicker and turn off and back on. This was at 10:56 p.m. I start thinking to myself that my battery must be failing, or else I have a short somewhere in the electric system of my car. So I lean down to pop the hood so I can take a look at the battery, and that is the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I know, I open my eyes and see nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night, and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up and looked around, and I saw absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. I was in the middle of a field, surrounded by corn stalks left over from the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I started to freak out. Where am I? Why on earth am I sleeping in the middle of a field? Where the duck is my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from a road about half a mile away. When I got to the nearest intersection, I looked at the signs, which read 350 N and 50 watts. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just right off the main road. I started walking toward the headlights I could see on the main road. I can't say how long it took me to walk the half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out, my battery had died, which struck me as odd because I couldn't have been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned off on the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I remember sitting in my car completely dumbfounded, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. After about half an hour of just sitting there, I remembered that my battery was dead, so I got on the phone and called Pele to come out and give me a jump. It took about an hour for them to get out to me since I was a good distance away from the nearest town, during which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. To this day, I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why I woke up over half a mile away from my car in the middle of a cornfield more than 3 hours after I had stopped. I have only shared this story with one other person, my uncle. I am sure people would either look at me like I'm crazy or they would call bullshit on the whole story. And I can't blame them. If somebody came to me with a story like that so closely mirrors the stereotypical encounter story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. So this story is from a few years ago, but me and my mother remember every single detail of what happened, but I would like some advice. I'm almost 100% sure I saw a Skinwalker, but the location doesn't add up? So when I was about in 7th or 8th grade, me and my mom were driving home from a therapy approach of mine, note, nothing for being schizoid, just depression and such. It was winter and a full moon because I remember the snow glowing under the moon. It was only 6 but really dark out because, it's in the middle of winter. So we are going about 55 miles per hour when this thing crosses and stops in front of us. The only way I can describe it is that it was if you combined a deer, a dog, and a human. It stood about as tall as our windshield, it had the legs of what I can describe as a deer, its back was hunched over and walking on all fours. It had the head of a dog, but its eyes were white, and it didn't have a tail. The freakish thing about this creature was its skin. It wasn't a canine with mange or anything, it had actual human skin all the way down its legs, too long to be dog legs. It smelled of rotting meat, and in some parts the flesh was broken open like if you would scrape your knee. It was pale white, and you could see its veins. And this thing was fast, like it stood there and just ran across the road in the blink of an eye. Me and my mom had to pull over to calm down. We both saw it. This sighting was in southeastern Ohio, between Gallipolis and Athens. I haven't seen the creature since, but it still haunts me to this day, and on that highway I'm scared to see it again. Can anyone tell me what I saw? I was driving across the country, and last night I stopped for my final fuel stop in Wamsutter at the Loves. I decided to continue driving just a ways further and find a nice quiet spot to park for the night. I was sleeping in my SUV. I decided to head out toward the Great Divide Basin. I parked for the night out by Black Lake, 10 miles south of the heart of the basin. While I was driving out there, an animal that I could not identify crossed my path that I would inevitably see again, though at the time I really thought nothing of it as I was extremely tired. I parked the car, took a leak, admired the total darkness and how magnificent the stars were in the absence of light pollution, and tucked myself in bed. After only a few moments, I was taken back by how deafening the silence was. I've spent a heck of a lot of time alone in some of the most remote backcountry in the West/PNW, and I've never felt what I felt out there. It was as if I could literally hear the vibrations of the earth. Nonetheless, I drifted off to sleep, or did I? I experienced an inception of dreams I had never experienced before. The dream layers were 4 deep. I felt as though I was laying there awake for hours, scared, feeling like I was being watched and very clearly feeling like a profound contact was pending. I heard my car being touched and bumped up against, and I just couldn't get comfortable. I kept looking out the window, trying to see what was trying to reach me, and then just trying to hide from it. I got up once and looked out the back window and saw very clearly about 5 vehicles parked about 100 yards behind me, then laid back down. Shortly after that, I got up and looked out the back window again, and there was a black and white goat grazing on the sage 10 feet behind my car. Then I laid back down. That went on and on as I kept waking up and laying back down until I finally actually woke up and realized that I was asleep the entire time. I have no idea how much time elapsed through that whole deal, but it completely shook me. I have never been so uneasy in my life. But it would soon be one-upped. I fell back to sleep after only a few minutes and then began the night terrors. I've never experienced this before. It was so absurd, and everything in my dreams was straight out of alternative dimensions. I woke myself up screaming at a stranger who was a humanoid but that I very clearly recognized as subhuman. "Help me, please, the devil is trying to get me." The dream was absolutely insane. As I woke up, my first thought was that was some seriously demonic shit, and I got right up, turned on my vehicle, and got out of there as quickly as I could, safely. It was profound, to say the least, as I headed back towards Wamsutter to go back to sleep with the comfort of bright lights and high traffic for the few remaining hours I had before I needed to get back on the road. I realized a couple of things. 1. The animal I saw that I couldn't identify was the goat that appeared to me in one of the series of dream layers. 2. It was not demonic because, with the clarity of hindsight, I realized that within the night terrors there was a very clear duality. There were malevolent and benevolent beings. I don't know what I experienced, but I have some theories, all more wild than the next. I have never been so disturbed in my life. I am very sensitive to energies and have the burden of a thin veil existing between my present consciousness and the other realms of existence that surround us. That being so, I have developed a masterful control of the contact that I allow, but regardless, I am very much aware of when there is an external presence. I would just love to hear if anyone has had any wacky experiences that they just kind of wrote off or tried to disregard within the Red Desert and/or Great Divide Basins. Just a couple of days ago, I was remembering something a woman told me a long time ago. This was back in the 1980s. We worked for the federal government in a clerical capacity together. This coworker and I began talking about weird experiences one day, and she told me that her father had had an experience very similar to yours, and then the same thing had happened to her. I have no reason to believe or disbelieve her, but she had always seemed of sound mind, seemed very normal, and had never seemed untrustworthy to me. Her dad lived in San Antonio, Texas. Apparently he drove back and forth to work in the evenings on a particular road out in the country, but it was very close to a highway. He came home one night and told the family that a flying figure the size of a human had followed him in his car for quite a while as he drove up the road. He saw it coming up behind him, and then it flew beside his driver's side window. When he looked at it, it looked human, but the eyes were very dark, and it had a frightening face. He described it as being dressed in a flowing, light-colored dress or robe, and he assumed it was a woman. Of course he was frightened out of his wits by it, and he acknowledged that he knew he sounded crazy, but he swore it had happened. My coworker said at some point, I don't remember now, as this was so long ago, she was riding along with him in his car on this same road one night, and the same thing had happened to them. She swore that she saw the same creature flying beside the car. It was on her father's side of the car, and its head was just at the level of her father's head, looking at them through the window. I remember she said she had screamed, and her father swerved the car. I don't remember anything else other than her saying that it absolutely was not a bird. I have never forgotten this story. I had an experience in 2012 that's haunted me and my mother ever since. It happened in the Bighorn Mountains, northern Wyoming. It's so unbelievable that I don't ever talk about it, but I've done a lot of research and pondering since then. You may laugh or wonder, what drugs was I on? Truly, sober, and the experience changed my life. My mother and I had stayed in a hotel in Sheridan the night before the event that we are still baffled by. We woke up in Sheridan, checked out, and headed on our adventure to the Medicine Wheel up on Bighorn Mountain. It was in mid-May and a beautiful, clear day. We stopped prior to the Medicine Wheel at a lodge/restaurant at the top of the range to have breakfast. My mother hung her purse on the back of the chair at the restaurant. We had breakfast, then headed out on the same road to continue our journey. Not long after it began to snow heavily, we were both surprised. It was kind of cool but got like whiteout conditions. We drove slowly. It was piling up. There was what appeared to be a previous snowpack as well. There was an area we had to kind of push through on the road, maybe a foot of snow. Still driving along, little concerned, we saw two moose to the left prancing, almost dancing in a circle, powder snow falling down. They were almost moving like Ring Around the Rosie. Something surreal and timeless, it was like watching something in slow motion. There was a long white fence that went down both sides of the road in this area. Very vivid. The turn to Medicine Wheel was closed, so we continued our journey on the same round down the other side of the mountain. We started driving down the switchbacks on the opposite side of Sheridan on the other side of the Bighorn Mountains. The snow stopped, and our view cleared. My mom looked at me and panicked. I left my purse at the restaurant. She had everything in there, including several hundred in cash. From the time we left the restaurant to this moment, it had been 45 minutes slowly going through the snowy pass on this road. I flipped around driving up in elevation going fast, so fast, on the same road. All the snow was gone, the white fence was gone, no moose, not a single sign of even a snowflake. We got to the restaurant in 8 minutes. The waitress had my mom's purse. Thank God. We both were in shock, not about the purse but by what just happened. We left the restaurant to head back down the mountain. I shit you not. We hit the same snow-covered roads and had to take our time back down the other side of the mountain. To this day, I don't know what happened, how we got back so quickly, or where the snow went. It's the craziest thing I ever experienced. It was like we were in two different places, two different spaces at the same time. Did we time travel? Did we enter another realm temporarily? I have no explanation, and it's hard to write about. It makes me feel crazy because I have no clue, but I swear on everything that something otherworldly happened that day. I remember this feeling that took over as I was speeding back to the restaurant and being in total disbelief that I was able to drive faster than 10 to 15 miles per hour. Total disbelief that the snow was gone. I wish I had answers. I know something happened that day that is supernatural. I know it. I'll take it to my grave. I actually have been wanting to plan another trip there just to reflect on that day and finally go to the Medicine Wheel, but not in May. Summertime when it should be open. I've thought about this day for years, trying to come up with every reasonable explanation as to what happened. I have none. Do you? Has anyone else experienced anything similar or anything near the Medicine Wheel in Wyoming? I want to start off by saying I don't believe in anything paranormal or supernatural. Despite my belief in science's ability to explain everything, I remain unable to comprehend what I witnessed. I live in Lubbock, Texas, and next to my town there's another smaller town, about 20 minutes out, called Wilson. Me and my 3 friends were just hanging out one cold night and saw it was getting late, about 3ish in the morning. My friend lived in Wilson at the time, so we decided to drop him off first to get the long drive out of the way. After we dropped him off, we got back on the highway, heading back to our town. As soon as we got on the interstate, we entered some misty fog. We had driven this trip plenty of times before, but this time we noticed something different standing right on the grassy median. The figure of a person dressed in an all-white gown with long straight black hair was facing away from us. I was driving and decided to slow down to get a better look. The second we got close to the figure, it turned its head like an owl to reveal the pale face of a woman screaming at us, then jumped in front of the car and flew up using her giant white wings. It wasn't a gown at all, it was wings covering her entire body. I don't know if it was just me, but I could feel her eyes burning holes in mine. The image of this giant bird woman still haunts me to this day. At the time, we were at a loss for words. We didn't understand what had just happened. In the matter of a few seconds, we witnessed some unexplainable creature, and just as fast as it appeared, it was gone. If anyone has had a similar experience, please feel free to DM me. This woman has been living rent-free in my mind for years now. I just want to figure out what that thing was. I've never shared this other than with my girlfriend until now because although I have belief in paranormal events to a certain extent, aliens, ghosts, certain legendary creatures, etc., I'm not the type that just believes every story to be true or wants people to think I've lost my mind. It was early summer 2010, I only remember because my 21st birthday had just passed and was finally legal to hit the bars. It was a Friday night, and I was up having a drink at a bar that my cousin David was the bartender at. It was a small town bar that outside of an event like a band or other entertainment was there, it usually stayed pretty quiet. It was very early in the evening, and I had just gotten out of work for the night working at a McDonald's in another small town less than 10 miles from the small town I lived in. I was on only my second drink of the evening when my phone rang. On the other line was a friend of mine from childhood, James. He was calling, asking if I wanted to come over to his brother's house and join them for a night of poker, beer, and weed. It sounded like a good time in my book, and since I was literally only one sip into my second gin and tonic, I agreed to make the drive into Toledo. Most people know where Toledo is, but for those who don't, it is a city in the northwest region of Ohio, about an hour or so south of Detroit. It was about a 20-minute drive from my small town, and I figured it would be a good time. I stopped at home to grab some cash. I only ever took $10 to $20 with me to the bar to make sure if I ever got caught up having a good time drinking I didn't screw up and have too good of a time and end up closing down the bar that evening. I left my house at 11:05 p.m. I remember that distinctly because I called James to tell him I was on my way as they were going to wait for me and start the poker game at 11:30. We always played a tournament-style poker game where we all put our money in at once and got equal amounts of chips. And played until there was only one person left with any chips left who then got to keep all of the money. I took my usual route over to his brother Eddie's house, as I have done so many times before. We had all gotten together a group of anywhere from 4 to 6 of us and would play poker in Eddie's basement at least twice a month. Usually more. I had just gotten to the corner of Oakdale Street and East Broadway. I was sitting at a red light in an area that's nothing but residential housing outside of the elementary school that sat at that exact corner. I'm sitting up looking at the red light, waiting for it to change, which always seemed to take absolutely forever coming from this direction, when I noticed something in the sky that, from my vantage point, was partially hidden directly behind the red light. It was a very bright white light that seemed to be pointing straight down, almost like it was a helicopter using a spotlight to identify something, but much brighter at the point of origin. I heard absolutely nothing after rolling my windows down and knew this could not possibly be a helicopter or I'd completely be able to hear it. Wanting a better view, I pulled into the parking lot of an ice cream shop that sat directly across the road from the school I was nearby and got out of my car to try and figure out what this thing was. When I got out of the car, I stared up into the sky and immediately found it again. It couldn't have been a plane because it didn't have the right shape. It was more oval than anything. Most stories you hear like this say it's circular, but it was definitely an oval shape. I almost thought perhaps it was a blimp given the shape. But it seemed far too large to be a blimp, even by the measurements of some everyone knows about, like the Goodyear blimp, plus it had no decals or identifying marks. Either silver or grayish. After what felt to me about 30 seconds or so of looking at this thing, my eyes started to burn, not burn in the sense of extreme burning or anything like that. But almost like that feeling of when a bug flies into your eyes and causes them to water up. I close my eyes and begin to rub them. My eyes are closed at this point, so obviously all I see is black. After finally getting my eyes to stop bothering me, I try to look up again and find it, only for it to be gone. I looked all around but could not see it anymore. This is a very densely populated neighborhood with houses, trees, etc., able to obscure any view of things you would look up into the sky to see. After a little less than a minute, I decided, oh well, time to go play poker. I get over to Eddie's house, which is about 4 blocks from where this had taken place, and knock on the basement door. A few moments go by, and no one answers. I decide to go to the front door and knock. I figured maybe since I'm probably 5 or 10 minutes early, that they were upstairs playing on the PlayStation 3. I knock on the door but still no answer. Finally I start knocking very loudly on the door, almost pounding. Eddie finally answers the door and says, "Man, why the hell are you knocking on my door this late?" I look at him honestly, confused, and say, "Well, your brother said to come over and come play cards with you guys." He stares at me for what felt like an eternity and finally responds, "Yeah, man, I know he did. He called you 5 or 6 hours ago, man. It's 4:30 in the morning. How late did you think we would be playing?" This scared me quite a bit, as from what I had remembered. At this moment, it could not possibly be any later than 11:25 to 11:30 at most. I attempted to play it off and say, "Damn man, I must have lost track of time. Can I use your bathroom before I head back home?" He agrees and tells me I should splash some water on my face as I look like I'm either drunk or haven't slept in a week. I walk into his bathroom, and my eyes are absolutely bloodshot, and it almost looks like I have 2 black eyes. To this day, I have absolutely no idea what happened to me that night. I have no explanation for the lost hours worth of time, how I could not have possibly noticed that much time being passed, or how on earth something that felt like my eyes being irritated by a mosquito or something similar flying into my eyes. I don't want to pretend to know what it was and explain it or even assume that whatever it was I saw that evening had anything to do with it. But it has creeped me out ever since. This was a couple years ago, but the memory is still crystal clear. I was driving some back roads from Gambrels into the next town over, Maryland, and I've driven this road plenty of times by this point. One night after dropping off my friend, we headed towards those back roads, but before we approached the turn for it, something small and fast dashed across the street. I still had some distance, so I flipped my high beams, thinking it was a baby deer and maybe a mom was following. What came next was not a deer. Mind you, I'm still driving, but at this point my foot is off the gas pedal because even with high beams directly on whatever it was, I couldn't see anything but a shadowy silhouette. Before I could really process what I'm looking for, it continued on and seemingly ran after whatever it was chasing initially. I looked over to my friend and asked him if he just saw what I did, to which he just nodded, looking pale as I felt. The entire ride home felt eerie, like we just had to get out of the woods portion. I remember thinking I saw glowy eyes throughout those woods, and it made me so uneasy, like something was just following us. We still talk about it from time to time, and it makes our hairs stick up. I mean, how could something be darker than a strong-ass high beam in Maryland? This is really my only scary encounter I've had, for sure. I was driving in another woodsy area the other night and swore I heard something, so since it resparked my interest in figuring out if anyone else may know or had something similar happen. It was a late night in February. I was coming home from a shopping trip. I turned off a busy road and onto a less crowded one. It had a restaurant and shitty apartments on one side and a Napa and bus depot before going into a stretch of forest with only a small gated storage unit before a little more forest before becoming lively again with business and less dense forest. It was not that late but very dark out, and on the right-hand side, right before the storage unit standing on the edge of the woods, it was around 9 feet tall, very humanoid looking, with a very fleshy wrinkled face. With small, barely noticeable eyes and a large smile, he kind of looked like a chameleon. He was wearing something looking like a mix between a poncho and a robe. In one hand he had what appeared to be one of those garbage picking sticks, and he waved with the other he had around his feet and on his shoulders what appeared to be bags of trash or clothes, and he had a laundry hamper next to him. I would have thought I was seeing things, but by chance that road had 3 other drivers that night who I saw swerving before I saw what they had seen. The next weekend I was going down the same road on the other side, and in a ditch on the side of the road, I saw the busted up remains of his basket. I need to get this off my chest. A year ago, my dad suddenly passed away due to a heart attack. He was my best friend, and I miss him every single day. As time proceeded and the grief carried on, I kind of got used to him not being there anymore. As cruel as this may sound. I dreamed of my dad a few times, and I still can't put together if it was just my brain processing the last images of him or if it was him saying his last goodbyes to me. Because in one of my dreams, I talked to him. Asked him what he was doing here because he died. Obviously, but he didn't answer in my dreams, he just stood there smiling at me with a gentle, loving expression. I brushed it off, trying not to hold on to my dreams. I wanted to move forward, as much as I missed him. That sounds weird, I still miss him, you know what I mean. And then, last December, 2022, I was at my best friend's birthday party. She lives half an hour away from me. I didn't drink because I had to drive home that same night. And when the time came, I said my goodbyes to her, jumped in my car, and started driving home. The drive was normal, nothing much happened. It was late at night, so the streets were quiet and almost empty. And then, out of nowhere, an ice-cold chill ran down my spine, the hairs on my neck stood up, and I had the urge to lock my car from the inside. So I did. I locked my car from the inside, turned the volume of my music down, put my vape away, and had both of my hands on the wheel. And I had the strong feeling that someone was in the car with me. The feeling was so persistent that I looked behind me in the car and checked every one of the 4 empty seats for a trace of motion. But there was none. I was extremely close to stopping my car to check if anyone was in the trunk or even beneath my car. As weird as it sounds. There was a strong, dominant presence in my car with me that night. And as soon as I pulled into my driveway, the feeling disappeared. I think my dad drove with me that night. I've had unexplainable encounters all my life. Especially after my stay at a hospital, where I had been pronounced dead for a few seconds after a seizure. But never anything like this. Please tell me, am I crazy, or do you think it could have really been my dad making sure I get home safely? This is a story based on what my friend and I witnessed 7 years ago. It was the week of my birthday, November 2nd, 2017, and as I shared a birth date with one of my gamer friends, we decided to have a weekend birthday party that would take place from the 3rd to the 5th. One of my friends had to go to work that Friday and work for a couple of hours before he could come back, but he didn't drive. I offered to drive him there and back as he was a very good friend and I didn't want him to miss the first night of tripching, Also, since I had reached an age where I was not drinking as much as I did in my early 20s. He worked as a floor cleaner. My friend went into work while I read my book, with nothing abnormal happening while I sat there. He came out a couple of hours later, and we set off back to my place. We'd been driving and talking further about various geeky topics until we began driving up this hill. We just seemed to have an awkward silence between us in the middle of our conversation. I specifically remember thinking something was off as we reached the crest of the hill. At the crest of the hill is a house on the passenger's side of the road with a mailbox and a guardrail, which leads from the base of the hill up to the driveway because there is a crazy ditch on the other side of the rail. As we were about 50 yards from the driveway, I saw it standing there by the side of the road. I could see the brown legs, torso, and antlers. I specifically remember thinking that the deer looked huge, and in the back of my mind thinking I should find out who owned property near there that would let me go hunting near the area. But as we reached the crest of the hill, I realized that this was not a white-tailed deer. This thing was standing on two legs with what would have been its front legs hanging at its sides as a human would have their arms. The head was also wrong, as it didn't seem to have a snout, and its face was just covered by hide with its green, glowing eyes facing toward us. Its antlers are sitting at the top of a human-shaped skull, which is not where they sit on a deer's head. This thing was massive, standing between 6.5 and 7 feet tall and very broad, which I am gauging off of the scale against my car as I drove by it in comparison to my size. I drove a 2008 Chevy Impala, and I am 6 feet tall. My abdominals were aligned with the window when I was standing outside, and when we were right next to this thing, I saw its legs at knee level. I managed to keep driving onward without issue, and my friend and I continued in silence for nearly a mile when he finally turned to me and said, "Did you just?" He asked before I cut him off, saying, "Yeah." As he brought it up, I felt a knot forming in my stomach, and he continued, "You know that could be." I cut him off again and said, "I really don't want to talk about it." We stopped talking about it and continued for the next 10 miles in silence till we reached my house. We went to bed even though some of our friends were still up, but I did not sleep well the rest of the night. It should be said that I grew up in this 4-county area and have been traveling these roads at all hours of the day and night my entire life, especially the one that we had taken, which I traveled at least twice a week at roughly the same time frame. I have extensive experience with Michigan wildlife and have acted as the nighttime deer spotter for my family since I was old enough to see over the dash. I have hunted since I was 10 years old and have killed many deer, and as is common in my area, I have been the victim of car deer accidents more than once in my life. If anyone thinks it was a person doing a prank, you can factor the percentage down to 0. It's near the end of bow hunting season at that time, and no one outside of the towns and cities would dare dress at a deer, much less by a road. I also discussed this with my friend before posting this, and our descriptions of events matched. We don't talk about this much and don't see each other often. I was used to staying up till dawn, so it wasn't me being tired. Why did it seem we had entered a sort of trance? I have seen blood spurting out of someone's open neck and not missed a beat as I applied pressure waiting for an ambulance. Why did it bother me so much? What was it? The Wendigo? A skinwalker? A not deer? Or something else? The questions still haunt me, along with the anxiety I feel every time I walk into the woods. I haven't seen it since, and I hope I never do. Help me make sense of what I saw last week. I work an evening shift 2 nights a week. I always drive the same route home. Last Wednesday, as I approached a slight bend in the road roughly 3 blocks from my house, something black caught my eye in the bike lane off to my left. I initially thought an animal had been hit and was floundering on the side of the road. There is a walking trail that crosses there, and a winding creek just below this spot. The road crosses the creek, animals like to wander here. People too. As I approached slowly, but it was still ahead of me, it seemed to billow up. My brain suddenly thought it was a large black trash bag caught in the breeze. Instead of blowing across the road in front of me like I anticipated, it rather seemed to be pulled down into the storm drain and disappear completely as I was right next to it. I regret not hopping out to look, but I was startled. Inserting that I used to be a team lead for a paranormal investigation team and study the UFO phenomenon fairly deeply. I love figuring things out. I don't need them to stay unexplained. But I can't quite sort out where to begin with this one. I have driven by the same spot a total of 6 more times now, in 3 different weather conditions but all at the same time of night. I have been taking 2 passes each trip home to try to see how shadows play there. It was not a play of shadows in my headlights. I have ruled that out. For some reason, this one is creeping me out a little bit. I don't get creeped out. I was really scared that night. All I could think was that it was the most IT thing I had ever seen, and I have spent hours and hours in haunted locations with all of the machines that go ping. My name is Daniel. I don't usually post on social media sites, but this is one of the exceptions. Not too long ago I was driving around town, and I had just finished running some errands when I decided to drive down this old dirt road. It was one of those late nights, and I had just finished at the cleaners and all. I figured the dirt road cut through the country and exited the highway that led to my house. Although this would be a terrible mistake that I would soon regret. Not much happened on the way over there, and it was mostly quiet, but once I got there, things went completely silent. Not even the crickets were chirping, and all I could hear was the rumbling of my truck's engine and the crackling of the gravel as I cruised by. Even though the road was a shortcut, it was still pretty long and narrow. My truck barely fit on it, and the road passed over several creeks that rushed down to the nearby river. As I was driving, I noticed a dense fog had rolled in. It was so thick I could barely see 5 feet in front of my truck. This was odd since the fog was definitely not in the forecast today. I continued driving slowly, and I noticed that a branch was blocking the road. I'm a working man and do a lot of forestry work, so this isn't something new. I got out of my truck and went to the back to grab one of my trusty handsaws. The tree wasn't too large, so all I really needed to do was slice it into 2 pieces, then push them off into the ditch. After a while, I started feeling a slight breeze from the north, which for one cooled me down but also sent chills down my spine. As I was putting my equipment back in my truck, I heard the sound of the wood from the trees creaking, which I'm not going to lie, kind of spooked me. I got back in my truck and continued down the road. Following this, I looked at the clock, and it said 12 a.m. Following this, I looked up quickly because I saw something dash across the road. I didn't get a good look at it, but it definitely wasn't a deer, and it damn sure wasn't a bunny rabbit. I continued driving cautiously and grabbed my revolver from my glove box. Then all of a sudden my truck died. Battery and all, and wouldn't crank over. I made sure my pistol was loaded and looked around. My phone was out of service, and it was now 12:13 a.m. Then something ran up to my truck and started pulling on the door and screaming like crazy. I damn near SHT myself because of it too. I locked the door, it's an old truck and doesn't have power locks, and scooted to the other side and locked that door as well. About 10 minutes later it got real quiet, too quiet. I scooted back to the other side of my truck and wanted to test if it was safe to get out. The sooner I get the truck running, the sooner I can hightail it out of here. I decided to roll down the window a wee bit and do a whistle. After a few seconds, something started shaking the ground, as if something large was approaching. And it kept getting closer. I soon found myself looking up at this ugly, disgusting, and weird-looking creature. Its legs were very thin and gray. The creature stood around the height of the trees and crawled on all fours across the road. It looked at me too. And stared the entire time. It didn't even blink. I didn't dare exit the vehicle for another hour after that. I couldn't risk the creature hearing me. At around 1:21, I gathered up the courage to go out of my truck and check under the hood. After a while, I tried cranking my truck. It cranked over this time, so I am not sure what caused it to turn off. By now the fog was gone, but it was still eerily quiet. So, I was hauling my ass out of there. I wasn't about to deal with whatever the hell that thing was. As I was driving down the road at around 50 miles per hour, I started feeling the ground shake again. I looked in my mirror and saw whatever that thing was chasing me. It had its saliva dripping from its tongue and dozens of little/smaller versions of itself. Even though it wasn't safe, I decided to go even faster, at around 80 miles per hour, down the dirt road. As I neared the highway, I took a slight detour and made the decision to pause, calm down, and rest here, given the presence of other cars on it. I felt a sense of relief. When I woke up that morning at around 9 a.m., I made it back home and sat down. I turned on the news to see if anyone had said anything about the tremors and all the damage that the incident should have caused. Nothing. I went down to the sheriff's office to report the incident. I knew they wouldn't believe me, but they did. They told me about this creature that has been known to roam around Dirt Road 66. They called it Creature 66, but they claimed that it was supposed to be a mythical creature. I got a sheriff to drive me down to the road, and we found my truck flipped upside down and torn to bits. The sheriff said they'd close the road down and asked if I had insurance. The sheriff's office helped make a cover story for the whole thing, since you know damn well that the insurance company wouldn't believe that a mythical creature tore my truck apart. Since this incident, I have refrained from driving around Dirt Road 66 at all. And the sheriff's office closed the road to ensure no further incidents would occur. While I was driving home one day after work, I noticed a bunch of men in black suits and a weird-looking van with men walking around in hazmat suits. I'm not sure who they were, but the van said AECC on the side. They may be from some government agency, but anyway, I hope this goes as a lesson for all. Don't ever drive on Dirt Road 66 at night. I'm from a small town in India, and this strangely cursed or haunted mango tree is located on the outskirts of a neighboring village, on the road that connects Mew town and the village, on the border of a field. This incident took place just a few months ago. I, 18 male, was on the way from a doctor's appointment with my parents and dog. It was late at night. Around 1 to 2 a.m. I was asleep during the incident in the passenger seat. My dad was driving, and my mom and doggo were in the back seat. My mom was awake. So we're on the way back, and all of a sudden I wake up to going down a slope. My mom is screaming, "What happened?" My dog is scared. I remember descending slowly under a bamboo tree. With this mango tree on the other side of the road, so on the field in front of the field where our car crashes into. And Dad and yells, "Yes. Would you treat a civil servant the same way? Would you treat a civil servant in the same manner? That too, Senyo?" He instant came to his senses and said, "Yes, sir, I'm on my way." So after this debacle, we're left waiting for the cop car to arrive. As mentioned, it's a secluded area, so they took time. Also, side note, my Labrador, who can be really vocal when he sees strangers, is completely quiet and almost scared the whole time. Now it's around 2:45 to 3 a.m. We're standing by the still road. It's pitch black. And I looked at the mango tree in question. I saw something sitting on one of its branches. It was darker than a pitch black knit with 2 red dots where eyes should be. A chill went down my spine. I didn't show I was afraid. I just told my parents that we just go and sit in the car. It's too dark here. They agreed, and we waited for the cops to arrive. The cop car arrived at the scene by 3:40 a.m. or 3:50 a.m. They made sure the car was safe. They said they would tow it in the morning, and the police officer was shouted at by Dad some more. They dropped us home. Then, my mom said, "I felt something bad there. Something is really filled with malice. Something dark." I also opened up about what I saw. I saw something sitting on the mango tree branch. It was darker than the darkness itself. I was cood sweating in the summer telling this. Somehow I slept that night. Or, rather, that morning. Why am I writing this now? Well, there has been a fatal accident at the same spot. A few days ago. A group of 11 people was returning from a wedding of their friend in the village late at night. They weren't drunk. They crashed into a mango tree near the mango tree in question. The tree fell from their car, killing 5 people on the spot. Another person died on the way to the hospital. 2 people are injured while 3 people are in the intensive care unit. One person who died is my dad's colleague's friend's nephew. After this incident, many people have told us about their experience with the tree, as it has been the topic of discussion around town. My mom's physiotherapist's assistant, who is from the same village, told me that his friend died when he was jogging past the tree and a branch fell on him. Around 12 years ago, 2 men died when they were going past that same tree and a branch fell on them. They were my uncle's acquaintances. These are the ones that I know. There must be more. Thank God that we survived whatever it was. May all the people who died there rest in peace. May all the injured people get well soon. My real life encounter. I was taking a break from a college seminar that had no bearing on my grade. It was noon. Bright, hot, and dusty. My friends and I, totaling 4, packed into a single auto rickshaw and headed to the local mall. I was not alone. I was not in a fast-moving vehicle. My college was situated in a town some distance away from the big city. The location was thriving and densely populated. I know that every city, no matter how crowded, has some abandoned, isolated stretches. We took extra care to avoid them. On that day, I was sitting on the left side of the auto rickshaw and looking outside in the same direction. The driver was driving down a stretch of road where all I could see was a wall. After the rush of passing cars and stinky gutter streams, it was a nice change of pace to see a clean, constant gray stretch. I was keeping myself occupied with seeing the wall's texture and how it changed down the road when I noticed a medium-sized gate, like one leading into a gated community, smack dab on my wall. I saw it from a distance. As we neared the gate, I saw an old woman walking out. She was wearing a rosy lavender-colored salwar kameez. Her head was covered with a dupatta, and on top of it was a straw basket. She was also wearing white nurse's shoes. The tip of her shoe was positioned behind her body. She was walking with backwards feet. I thought I was seeing things, so I focused hard as we drew closer. Within seconds of noticing her, I was staring at her feet without blinking. In the time it took the auto to reach her and leave her behind, I was sure of what I'd seen. I was alert. The toes of her shoes were stretching behind her body, and in the front, there was just a blunt heel that didn't protrude much further from her ankle. Maybe she had a deformity? Maybe she was wearing prosthetics? I had these thoughts. I was trying to be reasonable. So it came as a shock to me when my efforts to stay rational went pear-shaped, and without conscious thought, I found myself stepping out of the moving vehicle straight onto the street to follow her. The moving vehicle. My friends screamed. Their voices seemed to break my trance. I got back in and told them what I saw. We were kind of freaked out, so we stayed seated and asked the driver to drop us at the nearest marketplace. We wanted to talk, and the mall was too far. We discussed theories about what I saw, the veracity of my perception, and my stupid instinct to follow at the risk of a serious accident. On our way back, we took the same road to see if the nearby flower shop we'd seen there, or even someone from the other side of the gate on that wall, could shed light on the woman and her backward feet. We reached the wall and drove from one end to the other. There was no flower shop. There was also no gate. Mind you, this is a small location, and one of our friends is a local. She couldn't have gotten lost. This place wasn't even 5 minutes from the market we'd stopped at. We were confident we were looking in the right place. We know the gate was there because I pointed to it when I talked to this woman. The friend who was sitting on the left, in front of me, admitted to seeing the gate. Later on, I realized that when I had tried to follow the woman, I had become discouraged because I saw her disappearing behind a bend on the street where the wall ended, in the direction we had come from. The auto rickshaw had been driving down along that wall for a long time. How did she get to the end of it so soon? How did the end of the wall seem so close? When I reached home, I told my mother the story. She made me bathe in salt water and sprinkled Ganga Jal, water from a holy river, on me. Then she told me the legend of the form-changing spirits. They try to imitate the human form but always get something wrong, most usually the voice. Theirs is nasally. They have different origins. Some are water spirits. They may spend some of their time as a grebe bird, called pandubi, literally submarine, in India. If you enter their waters, they bite you, bewitch you, and drown you. If you enter their forest, they lead you to a ditch and leave you injured and lost. Apparently, if you trespass on their stretch of the road, they bewitch you into stepping out of your moving vehicle. My mother's positive karma saved me that day. In retrospect, the situation should have ended with more than just a story, at least a sprained ankle, but I'm not complaining. This encounter was back in 2001 when my family went on vacation to Maui. I was only 10 years old, and it was my first time visiting Maui but my second time to the islands. But this time, I was going to be able to remember it because the previous trip was when I was much younger. This trip included my parents, my older brother, my uncle, my nana, and myself. We were having such a blast, enjoying everything the island had to offer us. I decided from that point on that I wanted to move to Hawaii when I got older. I loved every bit of it. One day, we had taken an adventure and drove up the road to Lahaina, where we got to visit the 7 sacred pools. A whole day of swimming in the waterfalls, having fun, enjoying delicious food, and making memories. This road is an all-day trip if you want to visit every pool. So by the time we finished the last pool, sunset was already happening. The view was extremely gorgeous. We packed up and got on the road. Of course, this road had no street lights, as did the rest of the island, and you simply had to rely on signs and maps. Well, at some point we ended up taking a wrong turn that led us to this dirt road. It was such a long road as we had to go extremely slowly and carefully to a cliff being on our left side of our rental van. Here's our layout as I remembered it clearly. My father was the driver, my mother the passenger, my uncle sat behind my father, my brother behind my mother, my nana behind my brother, and I was behind my uncle. To keep ourselves entertained in this pitch black with only our lights to guide us, my nana was telling us old funny stories from when she was young, which led to ghost stories. She was in the middle of this story, where someone who knew someone had picked up a woman wearing a dress that needed a ride. When this woman got in the car, after a few minutes of small talk, the woman hiked up her gown, and the man who was driving saw that she had 1 donkey leg and 1 lamb leg. It was the devil in disguise, said my nana. We all laughed, as it obviously seems crazy to think that this actually happened. Suddenly our laughter faded because we saw something in the car lights ahead. It was a girl, and my parents talked quietly as to why she might be way out here and whether or not they should ask if she's okay. Then as we got closer, my nana said, "Don't look at her." As she was a woman with long black hair, wearing a white dress that reminded me of a prom dress, barefoot, and was walking along the edge of the cliff in the pitch black. I saw everyone look straight ahead, or with their heads down. I was looking straight ahead, but at the corner of my eye, I saw her pass by my window at a slower pace but kept walking into the darkness. It took us about a minute before someone asked, "You all saw her too, right?" We all exploded in agreement, and we all described her exactly the same way. That was crazy. Why would she be out here in pitch black when there's no driveways around here? They were right, there were no driveways or any houses that we could see. The cliff was on our left, and we were on a single lane road, with the grass fields and trees on our right. The city lights tiny specks of light that were at least another 30 minutes of a drive ahead of us, and the road to Lahaina was another 20 plus minutes behind us. It had only been about 4 minutes of us breaking down what we saw and how crazy odd it was when we saw something else coming. We got quiet again, no one said a word. A huge bull came out of the darkness. This bull was all white, with huge long horns, and was bigger than our van that we were in. It was walking on our right side, and we all just watched it pass by us in silence. It almost seemed like it didn't even notice us as we drove past. It was completely silent, and I honestly don't even remember hearing it walk past. Yes, it was a dirt road, but a bull of that size. I would think you could hear it coming. There was no noise, it just walked straight ahead. Again, did you guys see that? Yes. What did you see? And once again, we all described the same exact thing. We just couldn't make sense of it all. Where the hell did this giant bull come from? We agreed that we wouldn't tell any more ghost stories on our drive, and we spent the remainder of the drive in silence until we got to our hotel. Even then, we were all still pretty quiet from the experience. And no, there were still no driveways or homes that we saw until we got closer to Lahaina. 2 weeks later, we ran into my aunt, who's related by marriage and is from Hawaii. She asked about our trip, and we told her all the fun we had and then told her about our experience. "Oh. You guys saw Pele," she said with a huge smile, as if we saw someone she knew personally. Pele is the goddess of fire looking for her lost love. She comes in many forms and ages. She is typically seen on the island of Honolulu, but people have spotted her on all the islands. Everyone that has seen her says that she's always wearing a white dress. "Did you guys say hi?" We immediately blurted no. And she giggled at us and said that there's no worry. It was, for sure, a trip I would never forget. Even though I experienced that, I still wanted to move to Hawaii but never got to. It was interesting that we all experienced this, but definitely made it more fun. I hope Pele finds her love. But out of curiosity, if it wasn't Pele, who else could it have been? Late April of 2022, me and a few friends went on a road trip through southern Illinois. We passed by Shawnee National Forest and stopped at the Trig Observation Tower. After soaking in the beautiful view and smoking a few joints with a random stoner couple we met on the way up, we parted ways with our smoke buddies and headed out toward our campsite for the night. It was getting late, and we were driving down these back roads as the sun was setting. It was pretty isolated, incredibly thick woods flanked both sides of the road, and not another car in sight. That's when we saw a light up ahead, just barely visible through some thick brush. We slowed down, thinking it was some campers getting set up for the night or some hikers who got lost before sundown. As we approached, something seemed off. The light emanated from this old camper van, and the thing hadn't moved in months. Vines were slowly creeping over the canopy. The whole setup just screamed abandoned. We looked back to have a second look, trying to make out whether it was from a fire or something inside the van. At first glance, we didn't see anyone as we surveyed the area. But there he was, foot away from the camper, half hiding behind a tree. He was shirtless, only in his coverall pants and hiking boots. He was staring at us and didn't reply when we shouted a hello. As he began to walk in our direction with one hand hidden behind his back, as if he were holding something. We called out again to see if he needed assistance or knew where the campsite was, but he just kept coming, silent and expressionless. We didn't wait to see what he was up to. We leapt right back into the car and flew out of there, dust and rocks kicking up as we took off down the road. We were pretty shaken by the time we finally pulled into our campsite. Worse was yet to come. We had left the firewood at the last gas station, and with the rain, everything around us was pretty wet. We ended up hanging up our hammocks and attempted to fall asleep without a fire, which wasn't helpful for our nerves either. No sooner had we all sighed and started to relax than we heard footsteps coming up from over the crest of a hill. Slow and deliberate, just like the guy we'd seen earlier. We killed our lights and sat there in the dark, listening. It felt like hours before the steps stopped, and we finally worked up the courage to look around. We took our flashlights and knives, just in case, and did a quick scan but saw nothing. By then we said duck it, so we started packing up our gear, figuring we'd just sleep in the car. Then, from behind us, there was a cough. And that was all we needed to pack up in a hurry and race down the cluttered trail to our car. We didn't even worry about packing neatly, we just tossed all of our shit in the back and got the duck out of there. The next hour was a blur of dark, twisty little roads with no cell service and not a hint of where we were going. Finally, we hit a paved road, and, After about 20 more minutes and running on fumes, we come upon a little country store with a gas pump connected to an adorable house and auto garage. It had already closed for the night, but the family living there saw us at the pump while they were having dinner and came outside to help. They even opened the store so we could buy some snacks and pop. After what we experienced, talking to them was really a huge relief and let us calm our nerves. We eventually got back on the road and kept driving, 6 hours straight back home. Werewolf in Houston. I'll start off with a little background. I'm currently 23 and married with 2 daughters, not to mention my wife is pregnant. I'm a local truck driver in Houston, delivering lumber to mostly new residential construction sites. Anyway, my experience was on the 20th of July, 2012. It was a Friday night. I was 19 at the time and didn't have many responsibilities other than delivering pizza part-time, so naturally, being a teenager, I was out with friends at a house party in Old Katy, a suburb west of Houston, Texas. My friends and I experimented with both marijuana and alcohol, but we were always responsible enough to make sure one of us stayed sober to be the designated driver. That particular night, it was my turn to be the sober one. My friend Brennan had gotten well past drunk, and once he was starting to behave recklessly, I decided it was time to leave the party and take him home. He didn't want me to take him home, so instead he asked me to drive him to one of his friends' houses that I'm not familiar with. This friend, who I only remember as Joey, lived on the far west outskirts of Katy. I took a road called Morton Road. To get there, we rode with the driver and passenger windows down so Brennan could get some fresh air. The street is one turn off of Morton, called Bartlett. My sense of direction is fairly superior. I've delivered pizzas all throughout Katy and have since become a local truck driver in Houston. Bartlett had 3 or 4 houses on the right side, and on the west side was a fairly large forest area, maybe 40 or so acres, and dead ends just past the last house. I had noticed the moon was full before I even went out that night and vaguely noted it as I got to Joey's house, the second house on the right, and parked my car on the left side of the road, closest to the trees. I helped Brennan get out of my car and walked him to the porch. Joey came out and thanked me for dropping him off, and we said goodbye. I decided to smoke a cigarette before I left the road. At the time, I shared my car with my dad, and his number 1 rule was to not smoke in his car. After lighting my cigarette, it didn't take long to notice that the road was eerily silent. I assume I didn't notice before, as I was helping my noisy drunk friend get inside the house. Maybe 3 drags into my cigarette, I heard heavy footsteps going across the gravel, maybe 100 feet in front of me. I was alarmed at the sound they made, similar to the sound of pulling something metal against concrete. Just so we're clear, my fears have always been werewolves. I've always been into horror movies, I love scaring myself, but the only monsters to pop up in my dreams have been werewolves. Here I am, alone, standing on a dark road under a full moon, and I hear something big walking too close for comfort in front of me. I didn't hesitate to throw down my cigarette and get into my car. I told myself as I was getting in that I wouldn't turn on my headlights so I wouldn't have to see what was in front of me and simply reverse my way back onto Morton Road and get the hell out of there. Unfortunately for me, my car had automatic lights that turned on as soon as I started it, a fact that I was aware of but, in my panic, seemed to ignore. Immediately in front of me, about 100 feet, as I had guessed, was a 6.5 to 7 foot beast on 2 legs. It was covered in black fur with the body of a gym-addicted man and the head of what I guess could be similar to a German shepherd or a black wolf. It had human-like feet covered in the dark fur as well, with large claws sticking out about 2 inches, and it held its left hand out the same way a human would reach for something in front of him/her. I noticed that the fingers ended in large claws as well. While this was enough to cause my jaw to drop, what got me the most was that it was wearing torn blue jeans that seemed too tight and unnaturally torn and an open flannel blue shirt that was ripped at its bulky shoulders. It looked my way when the lights revealed it and glared at me with narrowed yellow eyes, baring its large fangs. My windows were still down, and I hadn't touched my radio, so I had no trouble hearing the loud growl it let out. It then turned its head to the forest, dropped on all 4s, and ran out of my sight into the trees. All of this took place in about 20 seconds, but it felt like hours. At this point I literally had tears in my eyes but didn't hesitate for 1 second longer to shove my car in reverse and put the gas pedal to the metal. I heard loud growling and grunting as I was leaving. I reversed onto Morton Road and went 80 to 90 miles an hour down the streets leading back to Katy and didn't slow down till I was on Interstate 10. While still on Morton Road, I kept my eyes in front of me and sobbed the whole time because I had never been so scared in my life. I can swear that the look I got from this creature was communicating to me that I had no business seeing him and that he wanted me gone. The look reminded me of criminals on TV being caught in their wrongdoings and wanting to cause harm to those who witnessed it. I got home, ran inside, called my Scottish Terrier into my room, and didn't sleep till the sun was up. To this day, I've never desired or had the nerve to go back to that part of Morton Road. I obsessed over the idea that I had seen a werewolf and researched werewolf sightings on Google and was intrigued by the Beast of Bray Road and Michigan Dogman sightings and everything else that came up. I was disappointed to see that nothing I found on the web was precisely what I saw. While the beasts others have encountered seemed similar, none were spotted wearing clothes. I told my mother and father what I had seen, and while my mother could tell I was being genuine, my father was more interested in me driving that far from home without letting him know, so I stopped talking about it. Of the 7 people outside of my family I've told, only my now wife and one friend seemed to believe me, most laughing and asking stupid questions such as, "Did you ask the werewolf if he got the vampires yet?" And similar things like that. It wasn't hard to notice that my story sounds far-fetched, especially considering the fact that I couldn't find any other reported sightings near the Houston area, nor much in Texas recently either. I never submitted my encounter online because I was scared of being ridiculed, or, to be honest, scared that if I did say my story, somehow the creature would find out and hunt me down. I'm honestly positive I'll never stop being haunted by the memory of this creature. It's just too vivid and too frightening to put out of my mind. I also never told Brennan, the friend I dropped off there that night, what I saw. In fact, I didn't see him again for 2 years until accidentally bumping into him at a gas station in South Katy. My grandmother took an interest in my encounter and told me the legend of our tribe's skinwalkers and the cursed enemies, which is intriguing and very disturbing. I'm not able to give much detail out of respect to my tribe, but I'll say this. Our skinwalkers are very different than the Navajo tribe's tales. They would transform into either bears or wolves when wars would break out. Once the leader of their enemies were caught, the skin wolf, our nickname, would bite and infect them, damning them to become a half-wolf monster on the full moon, similar to most werewolf legends. Our ancestors' spirits are most powerful and prominent during the full moon, and it is them who would force our enemies into their transformation. The curse would be passed down for every eldest male of each new generation of the cursed enemy's descendants. I normally would call all of this bullshit or just a scary story, but after the night of my sighting and what followed 4 years later, let's just say I've opened my mind. Last summer, 2016, my mom and fiancé, now wife, went shopping at Barnes & Noble and noticed a book by an author who was a cryptozoologist and who I followed on social media in case of hearing anything similar to my experience and thought I'd like it. I couldn't put it down, and after reading a chapter where a woman in Tennessee saw a clothed creature, I decided that after 4 years of hesitating, it was time to write to her. She believed my story and told me about a lot of people reporting things similar to mine, and I let her in on my tribe's legends to give both of us an angle we hadn't considered as far as learning what this creature is. It's been months since our conversations and since she posted my story, so she has no idea what came next. My horror wasn't over. In September 2016, I was delivering lumber to a new neighborhood in Katy, right near that goddamn Bartlett Road. The way it's set up is you've got Avenue D and Bartlett Road, the road of my encounter, running parallel to each other, with Franz Road cutoff connecting them in between, which is where I was en route to a new developing neighborhood and blew out my tire. My work truck doesn't come with a spare, so I had to call my boss to send a service truck out to replace my tire. All I could do was wait. I smoked about 3 cigarettes, listened to horror stories, and started working on lyrics. I'm also a songwriter, when a truck came down the darkening road. I assumed it was the tire guy, but the truck was old and beat up, probably a 98 model Ford F-150. Red, with a single cab. The truck slowed as it came by my truck, and he rolled his window down. I didn't pay much attention to him, but I looked up in his direction. His face was hidden, but in a rougher, quieter voice, he asked, "Hey bud, is everything alright? Anything I can help you with?" "Me no thanks, sir. I got a service truck due here about 5 minutes from now to fix my tire. I really appreciate your concern and courtesy, though. Thank you again." The man then turned his head sharply towards me and sniffed the air, then smiled, revealing very yellow teeth, with canines that honestly looked like fangs of a vampire. What freaked me out the most was that the son of a ditch was wearing a blue flannel shirt with patches on the shoulders. The werewolf I saw had a torn blue flannel shirt on. And I don't believe in coincidence, not after everything I've seen. My eyes were widened in shock, and his smile grew more sinister as he said, "I remember you." What? I stammered. "I remember you," he growled loudly in a demonic-sounding voice, and his eyes, I shit you not, turned yellow. The tire truck came down the road at that moment, and the man looked annoyed but was still very satisfied with himself. He looked at me, his eyes normal and his teeth just yellow but not sharp, and said, "See you around, Blake." I almost pissed myself right then and there hearing him say my name. "Duck you ducking monster." I breathed barely audible to myself, but he was already pulling away. I got his license plate but didn't call in. I mean, what the hell do I say to the cops? Yeah, this dude just drove by and freaked me out. I think he's a werewolf because he has a shirt the same as the one I saw 4 years ago. It just wasn't an option. I haven't seen the man since then and still refuse to go out on the night of the full moon. It's just not worth the risk to me. I know most people won't believe me, but I honestly couldn't care less if you do or not. I know what I saw, and I'm not crazy. The stuff of legends isn't just legends. This all has proved to me that the world we know is full of things we can never possibly understand. My advice to you is to not put yourself in situations that would be bad in a horror movie. I was the lucky survivor. You just might be the first unlucky victim of the never-ending hunger and rage of the beast. I live in Wisconsin, where the summers are nice but the winters are brutal. When it snows here, it really snows, and when it's cold here, it's really cold. This particular day my brother had come into town. He works out of town, and he frequently travels from state to state, so he's not home very often. So I picked my brother up from the airport. He was staying at my house for the weekend, and then I had to drive him to another town that next day, so he could fly out from there and head to his next destination. After he got to my house, it started to snow, but we weren't really worried about it. It snows all the time. Like I said, I've driven in plenty of snowstorms and plenty of whiteouts. I'm used to driving in snow, so it's never been something that I feared to do. I honestly would rather not drive in the rain before the snow, like that's how used to it I am. So the roads do get very bad here, they get very slippery. We get black ice and all types of conditions that make it very difficult for people to drive in. Okay, so on to the story. So that Monday my brother needed to get home, but it was snowing really, really bad, and I really didn't want to have to drive an hour away on the roads that I had to particularly drive on because they were straight roads where you didn't really get stops for miles and miles, and it was later in the day as well, but I knew my brother needed to be back home, so I decided that I would take him. At first, things weren't so bad. My brother started driving first about 20 minutes into the drive, and it started to get pretty bad, and I could tell that my brother was definitely getting nervous driving, so I suggested that maybe we should pull over at the next place that we can, and we would switch drivers, and then I would drive the rest of the way. I couldn't really see much either, but one thing I noticed was a big sign, and on the side of the road it said "Welcome to a particular town," which I can't really remember the name of, but it said, "Here time is always on your side." I've tried looking up this town and finding it. I've tried driving that way again, which I've done at least 7 more times since then, and I can never find the sign again. However, this particular night I see the sign, and when I see it, I think to myself, that's a really weird thing for a town to have as its motto, but okay, and then I reflected about how time is not on my side at this moment clearly. But about 2 minutes after that is when we stopped on a side road because my brother really had to use the bathroom and there weren't bathrooms for miles and we needed to still switch drivers, so as we pulled over, I remember my brother hurrying up using the bathroom and jumping back in the car and saying, "Man, the snow is looking really crazy right now, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, it is looking kind of crazy," but we started driving as I was driving. There were no other vehicles out on the road. It was clear that people were not trying to be out at this time because of the weather, so it was pretty much pitch black aside from the snow coming at us, and on the reflection of our lights as I began to drive, the snow kind of changed, it became different. It almost turned into something like a vortex. That's why I said a vortex, because it looked like we were in the middle of some type of snow cyclone. The snow was coming at us in like a swirling pattern, and it looked like we were almost driving through like a whole snow tunnel. But I didn't want to stop because I didn't want us to have to get stuck anywhere, and I was only supposed to be about 20 more minutes away from my brother's destination. So as I got there, my brother asked me if I wanted to stay, and I was like, "No, you know it's 7 o'clock. I really want to try to get home as soon as possible." So I jumped back in my car, put on my GPS, and I noticed the time is 7 o'clock. I get to driving, and I'm not really paying attention to the time, obviously, because I have to drive at the lowest of speed limits at a time. I was probably going 25, at the highest speed limit, I was probably going about 50 in a 75, so not really fast. So I obviously knew that I needed to add on about an extra hour of time travel-wise because of the speed that I was going, but when I got home it was 10:30 at night, and I couldn't account for what had happened to all of this time that I had lost. Like, how did I leave somewhere that was only an hour away at 5:45 p.m. and drop my brother off by 7 p.m. and still somehow not come back home till 3.5 hours later? I was not even driving slower than I've had to do before on that very same drive. It may have only ever added an extra 30 minutes to my drive, but 3.5 hours. It just didn't make sense to me again. I tried to do all the research I could to see if I could find anything about people having a time motto for their town or people caring about time specifically in their town. I could not find anything, and if any of you know about a sign like that in Wisconsin and a town like that, please let me know. I was using my maps, so it's not like I took a wrong turn and just figured out the way home. I checked my GPS, and there was no construction to where I had to take a different route or anything, so yeah, I call that paranormal or unexplainable. Whichever you prefer, it happened. I am a process server. If you don't know what that is, I basically deliver legal papers to people at their home or place of work. These papers could be anything from foreclosures to subpoenas to child support papers, etc. I have to serve papers to plenty of criminals and just sketchy people in general, so I always try to be very careful. Sometimes I serve papers at night because people tend to be home more often after 5 p.m. Sometimes I have to serve papers to people who live way out in the woods, in the middle of nowhere. These people are my least favorite to serve now, and I will explain why. A few months ago, I had to serve a paper to someone who lived way out in the woods. I probably drove 25 minutes out in the middle of nowhere. It was also when there was still snow on the ground and it was really dark out. I live in one of the most northern states, so winters are brutal. This situation already made me nervous because I was in the middle of nowhere and I had bad cell phone reception. If my car broke down or if I got a flat tire, I would be in major trouble. Once I started to pull up to the house, I decided not to pull all the way into the driveway because it didn't look well plowed and I didn't want my car getting stuck. They had a short driveway that went up to a tall fence, so the back of my car was sticking out a few inches towards the road because I didn't pull all the way in. When I went to walk up towards the house, I realized the fence was padlocked and it was too tall to go over. There was really no way for me to get to the house unless I broke the padlock or somehow climbed up the fence. I was pretty sure the house wasn't being used though, so I decided to just leave. I got back in my car and tried to get out. Pulling over to the side of the road, they parked directly behind my car. I remember how my stomach sank and I got this really terrible feeling in my gut. They pulled their truck directly and closely behind my car, so I couldn't back up, even if I tried. If I had tried to back out of that spot, I would have T-boned them in reverse. I had to turn my body around to try to see the driver. They didn't get out or roll down their window. They just sat in the truck, blocking me in. I couldn't see the driver very well because it was dark, but I knew it was a man. I think he was waiting for me to get out of my vehicle, but I just sat there and kept my doors locked. We sat there for what felt like a really long time, but was probably only a couple of minutes, when another car started driving up the road. The truck then starts to drive out from behind my vehicle and starts going up the road before the other car reaches mine. The car doesn't stop but keeps on driving behind the truck. This is when I see the truck pull over on the side of the road and wait for the other car to drive by. This is when I decided I had to get out of this driveway because I was not waiting for that truck to come back for me. I put my car in reverse, and instead of trying to inch it out, I literally slammed on the gas, and my car shot out of the driveway backwards. I almost went into the ditch on the other side of the road, but I slammed on my brakes just in time. I then slammed on the gas again and drove my car in the opposite direction of the truck. I looked in my rearview mirror once while driving away and saw that the truck had started to drive away in the other direction. I was so relieved, but instantly my eyes started to tear up because I didn't really know what had just happened. I can't say what the other person was going to do, but deep in my gut, I felt like I had just escaped something terrible. So creepy guy in the truck, let's not meet again. And to everyone who has to drive for their job at night and anyone else that is driving at night in general, please be careful and cautious. The road is a dangerous place for many reasons. This story isn't mine, but it comes from a good friend of mine. Let's call her Jess for this instance, and it still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. My friend Jess once drove home from her parents' house through a rural area in southern Germany. Least to say, it was late at night and a relatively quiet ride, until the road ahead was suddenly blocked by what she described as a large log. She was extremely irritated by this situation, as it was the sole route she could have used to return without having to drive for an additional hour or so, should she decide to drive back. When she got out of the car to further inspect the roadblock, she didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Germany is pretty tame when it comes to wildlife in rural areas, so there's usually no serious wildlife encounters apart from hedgehogs or deer, and began to move the log out of the way. Dunno how long it took her, but by the time she was finished, another car had stopped not far behind her, waiting for her to continue driving. At least that's what she thought. As soon as she got back into the driver's seat and continued her drive, she noticed that the car was following her. Initially, she thought it might have been a coincidence, as on a single road with no other options, it was expected that the other car would follow her path. However, The situation became more peculiar when they entered the next town and the car continued to follow her. She panicked and called the police, informing them about the situation and that she's driving home so that they can intercept the stranger as soon as they arrive at her home address. Since she was relatively close to her house already, she knew it'd take the police probably a few more minutes until they got there as well, so she decided to park a few houses away to not appear suspicious. She persisted in sitting in the driver's seat to check if the car was still present, and sure enough, the stranger had parked right behind her. At this point, she had the pepper spray at the ready, the doors locked from the inside, and was obviously super anxious when a man got out of the car and walked up to her window, waving at first and gesturing towards the back of her car. Confused by this, she decided to roll down the window a tiny bit to ask what's up with this guy. The man explained that he had only been following her until now to tell her that, while he approached her car by the roadblock, a stranger had snuck into her trunk and was probably still there. Jess was absolutely bewildered yet terrified by this. She couldn't believe the guy outside her window at first, but he then showed her that he'd called the police prior to their conversation on his phone, so she trusted him enough to get out of the car. Soon after, the police arrived, opened her trunk, and arrested the guy that had been hiding in there. It turns out her initial stalker was telling the truth and was really trying to help her out. I don't really have the details on who the guy in the trunk was, but I've been told he was definitely having ill intentions, probably breaking into her house or whatnot. Since then, I have never driven around with an unlocked car. The ones I've driven don't lock automatically, and I always make sure to check every window in my trunk before entering my car. P.S. The car she drove at that time was a Skoda Octavia, so the trunk was directly connected to the front of the car, which makes it even scarier since the guy could have just crawled to her from the backseat. Hitchhiking, 1986 for my beautiful daughter, Crystal Ripe. On a lost and lonely highway, east of Omaha. One time I was hitchhiking up north of Colorado. I just got past Waverly. Along the way a kind stranger gave me a ride for about 45 minutes, and I found myself outside some place in Wyoming. It was just a side road truck stop, the kind that just served truckers later that kind of time of night, and acting like I owned the place, I walked right in, I opened the screen door, and I went inside. Some kind traveler had given me a little bit of money, it was probably about $45, and feeling like some king of the world, I ordered myself a steak with some mashed potatoes and some gravy and a side of green beans. I sat and ate my dinner, feeling pretty good, when this trucker came in. He glanced nervously all about the bar, and then, finding me, he walked right up to me and put his hand on my shoulder. I looked at his hand, then I looked at his face, and he withdrew his hand as if my shoulder had grown teeth. I looked up at him with a smile and said, "Can I help you?" He said, "Are you traveling up north tonight?" I said, "Well, I was planning on it, probably walking through the night." The trucker said, "I wouldn't do that if I were you." He looked like he was about to shit himself. With a questioning look on my face, I said, "Why not?" The waitress said, "Sal, he doesn't know." The trucker, his eyes wide, they were almost bugging out. He looked down at me, and he then said there was a camper found on the side of the road. There was nobody in it. The police walked off in the desert of Wyoming, there, in the middle of nowhere for scores of miles, and after about 45 paces, they found their dead bodies. One was an old man, the other an old woman, and a little Shih Tzu dog, all buried in shallow graves in the sand. Even the dog's eyes were missing. I looked down at my food, no longer hungry for it. I started to push myself away from the bar. The trucker asked me once again, "Are you still traveling up north?" As soon as he said that, the air seemed to get thick. All of a sudden it was a simple battle just to be able to breathe. Sweat grew up on my brow, and I felt my feet almost seem to stagger as I got up from the bar. I asked the lady for a to-go box, and I started slowly walking towards the screen door. On a jukebox, all of a sudden the song came up, "On a Lost and Lonely Highway, East of Omaha." My feet felt like they were walking through some kind of invisible mud as I tried to get out, try to get somewhere else other than this place. The air felt so heavy, I almost couldn't breathe. I thought about my little girl down in Aurora, Colorado. I knew if I died out in this desert somewhere where she knew I would never ever be, that she would never even know if anyone would even find my body if I was to die out here. I started to sweat, but it was almost a cold clammy sweat, if you know what I mean. In that slow walk asleep toward the door, I heard the waitress say, "Be careful out there, it's probably somebody out there praying for you." You have to remember this was 1986, hitchhiking wasn't as dangerous as it is nowadays. If you hitchhike nowadays, you're probably going to die. Because there are so many psychopaths out there with your name on it. I left that trucker dive. I walked for about a mile and a half. I found an abandoned trailer on the side of the road. I crawled up in it. I found the furthest corner that I could unearth. Laying there among old spider webs and leaves, crying, I went to sleep. I was too young to feel this way, but at that moment, I felt the ancientness of the world, how cold the night could truly be. In 2018, I was employed at a national park in Wyoming, and a friend was scheduled to work alongside me. Due to some errors with his bus ticket, he got stuck in some nowhere town in Utah, and I offered to come pick him up. It was a 6.5-hour drive one way, and so I brought my girlfriend at the time with me to make the drive easier. I made it to the town in Utah and picked him up with no problems. It was about halfway back to Wyoming when the weird shit started. It was roughly around 1-ish in the morning, and I noticed 3 bright red lights in front of us, almost like someone hitting their brakes. It was 2 red lights with a smaller red light directly above them. As we got closer to where the lights would have been, they suddenly disappeared, completely vanished, like they were never there. Now in the moment I thought, okay, I'm tired, and I'm probably seeing things. I'd been awake for over 20 hours at that point. It was when my buddy in the back seat leaned forward and asked if we had also just seen those lights. My girlfriend turned and said she saw them and asked where they went. Up to this point, it had been well over 30 minutes since we had seen another car, as it was super late and we were on some backcountry highway. We passed where we all thought the lights had been, and there was no car, no road for a car to turn down, and no one around. Probably another 5 miles down the road, the lights come back. Same pattern, same brightness, same distance away. My girlfriend starts freaking out and telling me to go faster and just get us back to the park and how she didn't want to be in the car anymore. My buddy and I are starting to get a little freaked out as well. Same deal, we get to the point where the lights should have been and there was nothing. This happened one more time before we stopped seeing the lights. The fact that this happened and there were other people around to experience it made me feel a bit better. Until about a year later, it happened to me again, while I was alone. I was driving through the mountains of Colorado at probably a little after midnight, and I saw the red lights. Same pattern, same brightness, and the exact same distance as last time. This time I'd see them and I'd get closer, they'd blink out, and then almost immediately they'd reappear further down the road. That was 5 years ago. I live in Georgia now. I drive an hour one way to get to work in the mornings, and I make that drive at 3 a.m. I saw those freaking lights this morning. Anytime I tell anyone about the lights, people either don't believe me or they laugh it off as just nothing. I'm not sure if it's aliens or a ghost car, but something about this has spooked me. I sincerely hope someone out there has experienced something like this before. Don't eyes looked blinking. Click, click, click. I finally popped the hood and just looked at it, hoping it would somehow magically fix itself. It all looked foreign to me. At that moment, I wished I would have spent more time with my dad in the garage learning how to mess with cars instead of playing games on my PC. There wasn't any smoke, which I took as a good sign. As I was staring at the engine, I heard something move in between the trees on the far side of the road. I looked for a few moments, trying to see past the darkness, looking for any kind of shape. I could see nothing, but the sound of something rustling was apparent, especially inside the eerie silence of that road. I began to get creeped out and got that feeling like something was watching. That nervous, anxious feeling like someone was about to pop up from behind you. The darkness was getting to be too much and I got back into the car. "Well?" Brad asked. "Oh, I replied, shaking off the chills. "I dunno what's wrong, but man, it's freaking creepy as hell out there." "Oh, don't be a wuss. Then you go out there and take a look," I said, hoping he would because I didn't want to go back out there. "Maybe I will." "Then go." "But I don't really know anything about cars." "Wuss." "Fine, I'll look." Brad stepped out of the car and disappeared in front of the popped hood. I started messing with my phone, trying to get some power and maybe a signal. After a few minutes of fumbling with my phone, I saw Brad slowly moving into the middle of the road, trying to see into the tree line on the other side. I rolled down my window and asked what he was doing. "I think I see something," he replied, still looking intently at the trees. "What? What's over there?" "I dunno, man, but I heard something." "I heard something too, like something moving, huh?" "Yeah, man, and I heard whispers too." "Whispers?" I asked, getting those eerie shivers of fear in my skin again. I was hoping he was joking, but the look on his face said otherwise. "Yeah, man. At first I thought it was my imagination, but then I heard it again more clearly." "Do you see anything?" I asked. "Not anymore, but I thought I saw something moving behind the tree line." "Oh man, I'm creeped out. I'm getting back into the car." We locked the doors and sat silently for a few minutes contemplating our situation. It had been hours since we had seen anyone else on the road. Both our phones were useless. So we just sat there, hoping a cop or someone would come along and help. I kept my hazards on in case someone came along. We put on a CD and listened to music for a little while. I tried turning on the car, but it was just a dead click. My hazard lights were on and the radio was playing, so I knew my battery charge was good. We just sat there in the car with towering trees all around us and strange noises from outside. Every once in a while we thought we would see something moving in the trees around us, but we weren't sure. Then all of a sudden the CD that was playing went to a low static hum. Small whispers began coming out of the speakers. We stared silently in disbelief at the radio, trying to make out what the voices were saying. It was small chatter, and we could only make out one word, car. That was enough to send deep spikes of cold fear through our spines. After a few minutes of listening with no other discernible words, the CD came back on. We turned it off and sat wide-eyed in silence, trying to comprehend what we just experienced. "Well, that was duckin' creepy," I finally said. Brad sat silently, staring down into his lap, wide-eyed. He looked disturbed. "I remember a story my aunt used to tell me," he finally said, "about the woods where she lived. She grew up here in Montana, you know." All the color had drained from his face. He looked worried but continued, "She told me that there are spirits that live in the woods where she used to live as a little girl. That they try to lure the vulnerable into the woods, sometimes in subtle ways but other times violently if needed. She said she never knew how far the spirits lived into the woods but that the forests in Montana weren't a place to dabble with at night. I always thought they were cool, scary stories, but I'm beginning to believe she wasn't making it up." "What kind of stories?" I asked, beginning to feel the pulsating fear in my ears. I couldn't get the feeling like something was watching us out of my head. "I just can't get the stories out of my head right now," he said, shaking his head. "I wish I could not be thinking about them." "But you heard those whispers too. She used to say how, when she was young, she and her sisters would all sleep in the same room. Like 5 of them, all sharing 3 beds. Their house used to sit on the edge of the woods, and every once in a while, always at night, she and her sisters would hear childlike whispers coming from the back of the house through their bedroom window. And sometimes even small tears. They would tell their parents, but of course they never heard anything and didn't really believe them. But one night, my aunt woke up to something rubbing against their bedroom window. She woke up her sister sleeping next to her, and they both sat up in bed listening silently. They looked at the window and couldn't really tell what was rubbing against the window, but my aunt said she remembers it sounding like how your feet sound when rubbing the bottom of the bathtub. She got up and went over to the window, and that's when she began to hear weeping. My aunt remembers standing by the window, hearing the small crying, and then feeling like she was floating. She said that she remembered a certain whisper in some weird language before blacking out. But according to my other aunt, Elizabeth, who was still watching from the bed, she says she remembers seeing her sister stand there next to the window as a long, dark hand rubbed across the glass, wiping away the moisture on the window. She began screaming for my grandpa and ran to his room and woke him up. She kept yelling, "Hurry, hurry, a monster is taking Mary away, hurry." So my grandpa got up, and the other girls started screaming from the room. He grabbed his shotgun and ran into the room where he saw his little girl screaming and pointing towards the window where Mary was getting pulled out of the window by her hair by a long, dark muscular arm. Tugging and yanking as Mary stayed in some kind of trance. My grandpa slammed the butt of his gun on the arm, and it retreated. He ran outside, and nothing was there. He searched a while in the trees and around the house, but nothing. They would live there a few more years and then finally move, but my aunt always told me about those whispers and to be careful of what's in the trees because they can lure you in violently if they want. "Oh man, you are seriously creeping me out. You thought this was the best time to tell me a story like that? When we're in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by my creepy-ass trees. Jesus. Hey man, I'm freaking out too, but you heard those whispers, right? Better to be spooked and aware than ignorant, right? I mean, we've seen enough horror movies." "Well, I would just rather be home," I said before freezing in fear. I looked out the window behind Brad, and I could see someone or something crawling low to the ground toward our car. I sat there with my mouth open, not moving. Brad looked at me with fear in his eyes before turning around and asking what I saw. "I don't know man," I finally said. "It was something crawling on all 4s toward our car. It's out there right now. I saw it." We both sat there in cold, paralyzing fear, trying to look out the windows without getting too close. It was absolutely silent. Then we saw something on the far side of the road. Some kind of movement. We stared out the driver's side window to the tree line, where we could barely make out a shape. "Do you see that?" I asked before Brad pulled out his phone and turned on his flashlight. As soon as the light shone over the distance, we both started breathing heavily in fear. My heart sank to the pit of my stomach. Maybe 10 feet into the woods we could see someone standing there with their backs to us. Not moving. Then all our composure fell apart and fear overwhelmed us, making us gasp and yell in horror as we heard something rub across the back window of the car. We turned and saw something that looked like a handprint stretching across the back window. We turned back toward where we saw the person in the woods, and nothing was there anymore. We were beyond ourselves at this point. We were breathing wildly and our hearts racing. Then we heard one of the back door handles clicking like something was trying to get in. The doors were locked, but we were terrified nonetheless. We looked out our windows but saw nothing. Then the car started swaying from side to side. It must be in the rear, I thought. We both looked toward the back window again, and through the handprint we could see a dark figure peering over the trunk looking at us. It slowly lowered its head and disappeared below our line of sight. I looked out my window again and saw whatever it was crawl inhumanly fast across the road and disappear into the woods. We just sat there for a few moments in absolute horror. Then we finally saw it, a car driving up the road. At first we didn't want to get out of the car, but we couldn't pass this chance. We both got out and waved the car down. We didn't want to stay around there anymore, so we got a ride to the nearest town, which was about 20 miles away, and rode with the tow truck back to get the car. We went in the daytime, and when we got back, all the doors were open, and all our things were scattered out on the ground leading into the woods. Before we towed the car, we gathered all our things but noticed a few things were missing. A picture of me and my sister I kept on the rearview mirror was missing. Brad had kept a photo album in his backpack in the trunk. He thought it would have been missing too, but it was still there. It wasn't until we got back home and settled in that he called me. He told me frantically that there was a picture missing in the album. It was about him and his Aunt Mary. When my friend and I were driving from Tucson to San Diego, about 10 miles before Yuma, we saw one of these hovering above a small mountain, off to the north from the interstate. No sound or movement, no visible propulsion, and it was a silver circle/oval that looked metallic. It was easy to see it wasn't a balloon because it looked like aluminum and machined. It wasn't crazy shiny. Sometimes it would appear to evaporate, but you could see it again by looking away and then readjusting your eyes, or, like you said, look at it in your periphery. It was hovering maybe 70 to 100 feet above the small mountain's ridgeline, never moving. One thing we thought was strange was that it was like shiny but not shiny. It was a clear day and early, but it didn't have sunlight bouncing off of it like a Doppler or stationary antenna array. It was like those matte car wraps, but even those reflect light and don't absorb it. This object's finish would not change color, but it would be harder to see the longer you looked at it. I do remember the closer the highway got to it, the better I could see it, so it wasn't moving. My boy was driving, so I spent a good amount of time looking at it. When we were maybe 3 miles further west from it, I lost sight of it and couldn't get my eyes to refocus on it again from that angle. The interstate passes through a small range just east of Yuma after you pass through those valleys, so after a bit I couldn't keep looking for it. A few days later, when we drove back, it was gone, and on subsequent road trips, I never saw it again. I assumed it was a military object, but after thinking about it over the years and reading similar stories, I realized it was not. Ironically enough, there's a UFO viewing group that watches the sky at meetups along the same interstate on the Cali side just west of Imperial Valley, as soon as you get up into that first mountain range, where that historic tower is. I used to see groups of them whenever I drove through. That area, near the border, must be active. At the time, I was driving at night with my girlfriend through upstate NY, near Chatham, I believe, taking a weekend break from the city to enjoy some fresh air. Because neither of us were familiar with where we were, we had maps guiding us to the restaurant where we had reservations. I should note this restaurant was in a town and not in the woods. So we're driving, having a great time when Google Maps starts leading us away from where we kind of intuitively know where the restaurant actually is, further and farther away from towns and deeper into the country. But neither of us are familiar with the area, so we keep following directions. Pretty soon we are on a back road, and we're saying to each other there is no way this is the right way. But G-Maps has the right address and claims we are going the right way. Service on our phone starts dwindling, so we're unable to open Apple Maps, for example, and cross-check the route. It got really weird when it told us to turn onto what looked like a driveway/gravel road. We very reluctantly took the turn and started down this road, and very quickly it became obvious that it was not a road. We're driving maybe 5 miles per hour, saying to each other what the hell is happening right now, both of us getting more and more freaked out. We are looking for a place to turn around when we come upon this open area with barns/old decrepit buildings and vehicles all around. It felt exactly like the kind of place one might be murdered by a hills have eyes sort of family. The hairs were standing in the back of my neck, and we were on full alert, although there was no sign of life anywhere around us, just these derelict vehicles and old equipment. We turn around with us both basically hysterical, feeling like our lives were in danger even though there was no evidence of that. Just us alone in the woods in some creepy-ass junkyard. So we book it out of there, and as soon as we get back to the road, wouldn't you know, the GPS reroutes us in a completely different direction. I'm still so confused as to what was happening out there that night. Has anyone else ever experienced something like this? I don't know what was leading us, but I've never really felt dread like that before or since. Okay, so I'm a 16-year-old male, and I live in the suburbs on the East Coast in a town with a population of about 25,000. It was a normal night a couple years ago. I don't remember exactly what I was doing that night except that I was on my way home when this happened. I was in the car with my dad and my little brother. My dad is an alcoholic and used to verbally and physically hurt my whole family, and as much as I'd love to divulge into the horror of my upbringing, this is the only detail relevant because even though my father is now sober, I'm still very uncomfortable around him, but my little brother was too young to remember much from when he was abusive and is much closer with him, so when we ride in the car, my brother sits in the front with my dad talking about whatever, and I sit in the back listening to music with my headphones falling into my thoughts while staring out the window. This night while I was on my way home was no different. I remember we were almost back, maybe about 5 minutes away, and we were coming up on passing a church, and I got immediate goosebumps when I laid my eyes on it. Then I was rushed with an overwhelming feeling of terror and couldn't look away from the church as we grew nearer and nearer, fearing something bad would happen if I did. So this unexpected feeling of terror on a completely normal night surrounded by what I knew as the safe place I grew up in was very unusual. As we get nearer to the church, I see 2 deer in front of it on the lawn. One is lying on its side, the other is standing, and it has its head bent towards the other's stomach. The deer on its side is dead, and the other deer has giant black horns that almost look like the horns on the helmet Hela wears in the Marvel movie Thor Ragnarok. They were absolutely massive, and it looked like the deer shouldn't have even been able to support their weight. I am frozen in fear when I realize the one standing up is devouring the dead one, and as we pass by it, it looks up at me straight in the eyes. It felt cold and angry, and I knew any intentions this thing had were malicious. This is weird, but locking eyes with it almost made me feel like it knew me, like it stared inside my soul and explored every nook and cranny in my brain. Thinking about the feeling still sends a shiver down my spine because it was so unnatural, uncomfortable, and terrifying. But you could say that to describe everything about this creature. The skin had begun to rot off its face, and I could see parts of its skull. It had sharp, shiny teeth and was covered in blood. My father and brother didn't notice anything, and I thought maybe I was seeing things, but that primal fear convinced me it was real because I've never felt any kind of fear as real as what this felt like. I was truly scared for my life. In those few moments passing by this thing, I could feel its rage. It was almost tangible, and it felt awful. I knew that it wanted to kill anything or anyone, and it would do anything for its satisfaction. I believe me noticing its presence made me its next immediate target, which would explain why I was the only one affected by its presence. My father and brother were both unalarmed enough to not even notice it. But, thank God I was in the car, and we passed it, and that night went on as usual. I couldn't stop thinking about it though, so I went to the church the next day early in the morning and found the dead deer. All of its fur was skinned off, and it had a huge hole in it. Upon looking inside, I saw that its body was completely hollow, no blood, no organs, no nothing, but it wasn't flat. It looks like everything was still intact, that it just died and had no fur. It was gone before the day was over. I still have no idea what happened that night, but I haven't seen anything similar since this, and I don't know if it was a skinwalker or not. All I know is that it scared the duck out of me, and I hope I never see anything like it again. While driving to work this morning, I came across a side street that connected to a heavily trafficked road in my area. It's the main road that stretches through like 20 towns. I get to the red light at this main road and sit there for about 15 seconds before seeing a car pull up behind me. As the car comes to a complete stop behind me, my eyes drift from the rearview mirror to the stoplight in front of me. It was red still. I then look down to my radio clock, and it says 7:36. This is going to sound strange, but for a period of time that seemed to stretch on until infinity, I kind of felt like this intense pressure all around me, like I was zoned out and couldn't clear my head or move my body because I was obsessed with the numbers I was seeing, like I was in a trance or something, and it wasn't silent around me, but it was at the same time, like very, very loud, pressing silence. I couldn't move, but I also wasn't trying to move, almost like I was paralyzed with fear and knew I was frozen but couldn't really process it or try to move. I really can't explain it. Even now it's so confusing to me. After who knows how long of being stuck in this trance, suddenly everything snaps back to normal. Instantly. The very first thing I register is that the person behind me is lying on their horn. I look up and see the light is green. I begin to drive forward, feeling completely normal again, and once I get into the middle of the intersection, I sense this large presence to the right, left, of me. I turned my head to look out my driver's side window just in time to see a huge truck coming right at me. It hits me, and I could feel my body break. I felt and heard so many of my bones get absolutely crushed. Suddenly I'm upside down in my car, in so much pain I can hardly breathe, covered in glass, and I can hear someone screaming. The last thing I remember before I passed out about 10 seconds later was seeing cop lights and distinctly thinking to myself, wow, how did they get here so fast? This is important. The next thing I remember, I open my eyes, and I'm sitting in my car at the red light. The intense pain I felt a moment ago is fading fast, but it's still there, only almost like a ghost version of itself, if that makes sense. I'm intensely confused at this point, and I start looking around in a panicky way, and my eyes trail across the clock again. It says 7:36, and I'm beyond confused. I know it wasn't a daydream. It was so goddamn real. I'm frozen in place, staring at the clock, trying to figure out what the duck just happened. After about 5 to 10 seconds, I hear the person behind me start to beep at me, but I'm shaking and about to cry and so overwhelmed with leftover fear that I can't even react to it. They start to lay on their horn, and I still can't move because I'm just so confused and frightened. Now, at this point, I was starting to calm myself down and trying to rationalize what happened. I was beginning to convince myself that it had to have just been a daydream. It was early enough, and I was tired enough that I even started to think I just nodded off at the red light and dreamed the crash. What else could have possibly occurred? If it weren't for what happened next, I probably would have been able to go the rest of my life believing I had fallen asleep and dreamed it. The moment the clock turned 7:37, like the very second the numbers changed, a huge truck came barreling through the light, definitely speeding. They ran their red light and crossed right in front of my car. A few seconds later, a cop, who must have just been driving behind the truck in the first place, runs the red light as well, turning on his lights in the process and beginning to pursue the speeding truck. They both drove out of my view within a few seconds. I was so shaken. I just pulled my car to the side of the road right where I was and sat there in silence for, I don't even know, how long. Like, what normal explanation could I possibly come up with for this? There isn't one. I hadn't seen the truck or the cop car before they ran the light in front of me, so how did the dream crash I had include those very specific and very real details? The entire area I live in is covered in trees, so it's not like I can see very far down the road in either direction. I know for a fact I did not see the truck or the cop car before I experienced the crash. I'm still so shaken. How do I rationalize this experience for myself? I feel disillusioned by something, but I don't even know what. I feel like I'm going crazy. I needed to share this with people who won't automatically dismiss this as a hallucination or a dream. My best friend found this community. He told me I needed to share this story. It's kind of weird and unbelievable. I have no proof it happened, but if you want to hear a story, gather around. In the winter of 2009, my brother and I took a road trip from Portland, Oregon, to Port St. Lucie, Florida, and back again. We made the trip to visit my sister, who lives in Port St. Lucie. She and her husband just had their first child, and my brother and I were excited to see the newborn. On the trip to Port St. Lucie, we took a combination of freeways from the northwest all the way down to the southeast corner, basically a diagonal route, but several times throughout our voyage we were tremendously delayed by snow. The trip, which should have taken no more than 3 days, ended up taking 5. Because of this delay, we had to cut short our visit with our sister's family. On the trip back to Portland, we decided to take I-10 the entire way. This stretch of freeway runs all the way from Florida to Los Angeles and would completely keep us away from the snow. The I-10 route added several hundred miles, but we both needed to be home for work the following Monday, and this was a surefire way not to be delayed. The first day of the return trip was uneventful, but we did manage to drive 1,300 miles from Port St. Lucie to San Antonio before stopping for the night. The plan was to make it all the way to Las Vegas the next night, which would leave us with about a 14-hour final day drive. The trip was going well. It wasn't until we left San Antonio that the glitches started happening. The car we took on this trip was a 2008 Honda Civic Hybrid. The entire trip we had been getting right around 35 miles per gallon, this is digitally displayed on the dash, so we had become very aware of how many miles we could squeeze out of a tank. We knew to refuel around 350 miles, but we also knew we could stretch that number into the low 400s if need be. About 100 miles outside San Antonio, I noticed the fuel gauge was dropping noticeably faster than usual, so I clicked the button to change the dashboard display only to see the car was getting only 26 miles per gallon. At first I was shocked, but I reasoned it to possibly driving uphill the entire way. I still don't know. I thought throughout the course of an entire tank of fuel that it would eventually balance itself out and we would finish the tank within that 35 miles per gallon range. I was wrong. I kept a very detailed log of this entire trip, and this one stop in Fort Stockton, Texas, is the only anomaly in the entire book. The car, which had consistently held around 35 miles per gallon, suddenly finished an entire tank off at 25.8 miles per gallon. That is over 100 miles difference in the vehicle's normal range. I still to this day cannot figure out why there was such a drastic shift in fuel consumption in that 300-mile stretch from San Antonio. I've reflected on that tank of gas several times since this happened, and I have almost come to the conclusion that it was an intentional glitch in order to make us pull over where we did. Our original plan was to refuel about 50 miles later in a town that I cannot remember, but we obviously ran short on fuel. Anyway, with our GPS program to Las Vegas, Nevada, we headed back onto the road in which the GPS directed. Pretty soon after we got back on the road, we realized we were no longer on I-10 heading west. Instead, we were north on Highway 285. Evenly numbered highways and freeways are heading east/west while odds are north/south. We didn't think much about being off the interstate because many times throughout the drive we had been directed onto bypass highways. We assumed this was just another such instance. After about an hour and a half of driving on Highway 285 we crossed into New Mexico, which was about 2 hours earlier than we should have crossed the border. By this time we realized the GPS thought this was a more efficient way to go to Vegas, even though by all accounts it is about an hour faster if we had stayed on the 10. We were annoyed, but decided to just stick it out with the GPS and keep heading north through New Mexico. Nearly 5 hours after refueling in Fort Stockton, my brother and I were hungry and decided it was time to find somewhere to eat. Driving through this part of New Mexico is kind of lonely. There are very few towns, and where there are towns, they are small and on the verge of becoming ghosts. I think their economies are built around helping travelers fill up their gas tanks. Other than that, I cannot see a reason for them to exist. My brother and I have talked about what happened next so many times, but we still cannot figure it all out. We passed through a small town with a couple gas stations, and we know the town was named Vaughn, New Mexico, and then about 20 miles later we drove through a town called Encino, New Mexico, which did not have a gas station, that we can recall. In fact, the second town didn't really seem to have much there, if anything. I wasn't sure if anyone was living there. I seem to remember questioning why it existed in the first place, but then quickly dismissing it and driving right through. Not even 10 miles after passing through Encino, New Mexico, we surprisingly came upon a city/town that wasn't loaded in the GPS. This wasn't a big deal, because I was using a cheap handheld that lost its signal all the time, but usually the only things it didn't display were newly built roads and recent construction areas. This city was definitely not brand new, so I figured the GPS was being buggy. The oddest part of finding this city is that neither of us remember seeing any warning we were coming up on a town of this size. It had several fast food joints, restaurants, hotels, motels, grocery stores, Albertsons maybe, and even some bars. If I were to guess, I would say this city had roughly 10-20k people. We decided to pull off and grab a bite to eat. Normally we probably would have grabbed some fast food, but my brother saw a Ruby Tuesdays and really wanted to try it out. There were a couple Ruby Tuesdays around the Portland area at the time, but neither of us had been there. We had just heard they had a pretty good salad bar, and I guess my brother was in the mood for something other than fast food. I went along with the suggestion because I was sick of eating junk. For the remainder of this story, I will be N and my brother will be G. We pulled into Ruby Tuesday's parking lot, got out of the car, and walked in the restaurant. Immediately upon entering, a waitress who was milling around the host station says, "Oh my word, is that N and G?" Both my brother and I answered that it was indeed us, and the waitress went on to ask how life was in Portland. Suddenly it clicked, this girl knows who we are, but we are over 1,000 miles from home. Did we know her from back home? My brother and I both gave very basic, vague answers to her question, and I could tell she was kind of unsettled that my brother and I were being evasive. When we were seated, my brother immediately asked me where we knew her from, which was the same question I was going to ask him. I told him that I had no idea who she was and that she obviously had mistaken us for some other people. Not more than a minute later this guy bartender comes up and says, "No ducking way, G and N. You back for jobs?" "What?" My brother went on to tell the guy they had us mistaken with some other people. He laughed and dismissed my brother's response as a joke. The bartender continued on seamlessly and started asking us how we fared in the 3-month anatomy and physiology course we had taken at Oregon State. I remember thinking all of a sudden, this is not a coincidence anymore. My brother and I had taken a 3-month, 15-credit A&P class at Portland State University when we were in our early 20s. We were late 20s when this interaction happened. Finally, I asked the guy exactly where they knew us from, and he just kind of paused and started looking me over. Then he said, "Oh damn, you guys just look really similar to some people that used to work here." He apologized and claimed he had to get back to work. After a bit, our food came, and my brother and I noticed they had switched out our waitresses from the girl who recognized us when we walked in. That wasn't a big deal, although a bit strange. Next, a guy who I can only guess was the manager starts walking over to our table with a big smile on his face. As he gets within about 10 feet of us, he kind of starts looking over my head and stops. I think someone behind me was directing him not to talk to us. After he received the message, he sharply turned 90 degrees and walked away without saying a word. This had quickly become the most awkward meal of our lives. It went from people acting like it was a celebration for us to have shown up to everyone avoiding eye contact with us at all costs. After we finished up with our meals, the waitress came and told us the cash registers were frozen and that our meal was on the house. I really wanted to ask the waitress what the name of the city was that we were in, but I also really wanted to get out of there. After leaving the restaurant, we were running pretty low on gas, so I decided to refuel before we got back on the highway. I assumed the name of the city would be printed on the receipt. We were not that lucky. This city strip was a one-way road on the eastern side of the highway. When we left Ruby Tuesdays, the only way to turn was right, and it headed straight back to northbound 285. In order to refuel, I would have to head north on the one-way street and turn right on a side street to head back to the southern part of town to the gas station. The only available right-hand turnoff that one-way street was closed, so I was forced back onto the highway without fueling up. About 20 minutes later, we found a truck stop at the intersection of 285 and I-40, where we finally filled up. The rest of the trip was very ordinary. We talked at length about how weird that Ruby Tuesdays was in the middle of New Mexico. We came up with solutions about how we had doppelgangers with the same names. We joked about how people that look similar follow the exact same paths in life regardless of their upbringing. We talked ourselves into it being a major coincidence. When we finally got back to Portland, we decided to do a little research and find out the name of this town. We know we refueled at a truck stop at the intersection of 285 and I-40, which means that we had to have passed through Vaughn and Encino, so there should be a city between the truck stop and Encino. I don't see anywhere on the regular map or the satellite map where this little city could possibly be. We have never really been able to answer what happened that day. I can still vividly remember the waitress's face of unease by the way my brother and I were behaving, the bartender's voice change when he figured out we were not the people he thought we were, and noticing that the manager looked identical to the actor Ken Moreno. My brother and I know this stuff happened, but we have never been able to find the solution. Maybe some of you can give me an answer, or perhaps this was just a glitch. Maybe someone has driven that stretch of road and knows the town. Let me tell you of my adventure on Elbow Road in Virginia. One of the most haunted roads in Virginia, some say. I was 16 at the time when my friend Mikey P and I decided to go check out the haunted house on Elbow Road. I had just gotten my license when we decided to go to Elbow Road with 2 ladies for an adventure. At the time I only heard about the haunted house and did not realize that the entire road was said to be haunted by a little girl and a woman nicknamed Mrs. Wobel, elbow spelled backwards. I had to admit I was excited to go. Mikey had been there before and wanted me and these 2 girls to join him, and we decided to go. But once you start on a curve on Elbow Road, she will disappear, and the steering wheel will be ripped out of your hands, sending you careening off the road. I was fortunate enough to have the 2 ladies sitting in the back because even if I saw her, there would be no way I could pick her up without the girls noticing something. However, it does not mean that the road was anyway less creepy, knowing that due to the fact no lights are present besides your headlights. When we started to approach the house that was said to be her home, the feel of the night suddenly changed. At the moment we passed by the home, Elbow Road had a fog beginning to form as if knowing what we were planning to do. Mikey P told me to drive up a little bit further where a church sat that we could park to make our way to the house. The reason was that there were no trespassing signs throughout the estate, so we were not willing to get arrested that night. As we pulled up to the church to park, Mikey was preparing the camera we were going to take in to film our adventure. He loaded a fresh battery and made sure it worked before we left the car. There was a field we had to travel covered in trees to make our way to the house, where we started to bullshit a bit and mess with the girls to get them scared. But as we approached, the energy changed around us. All of us felt uneasy as, with each step, it seemed a mist began to form on our path. Mikey turned on the light from the camera for us to film and see where we were going. We had to enter the back of the house because the front was boarded up. When we started to head for the back door, it got a bit colder before entering. However, once we were in the house, it became warm and humid. Once we entered, the smell of mildew and rot filled our nostrils. The house was extremely dilapidated and smelled unique. Not sure how to describe it besides unique. We began our exploration with the camera. Trash and broken furniture scattered about the lower part of the house. It became a bit stuffy as we entered the kitchen, where a wooden stove still sat with broken dishes and glass covered the floor. Beer bottles and old dishes caked in dust as if people used to come here and hang then decided to never do it again. Soot surrounded the inside of the stove, as silverware was strewn about throughout this area. We then made our way across the hall, passing the steps into the living room. More furniture and graffiti covered the walls, broken and stale. Noises echoed through the house. The girls were a bit more nervous now hearing the noises, but we decided that it could be us and the old floorboards. Mikey and I cracked jokes to hide our fear, as we too were nervous but could not show our fear. You know those cheesy jokes to hide your true feelings that men and women both make to try to ease their nervousness. But we still felt uneasy. Mikey then told us to come with him upstairs. He wanted to show us something. We made our way to the staircase, and with each step we took, the screech of the stairs called out as we moved to the second story. We arrived on the second floor, and it had become drastically colder up there than what we experienced on the first floor. Mist came from our noses and mouths as we breathed. Each person could see each other's breath. We walked down the hall, and a breeze swept over us. Mikey P stopped in front of a well-covered graffiti wall and pointed the light to a quote on the wall. It was a poem written in red ink. I began to read it, and as I finished, the light on the camera went out. The camera was fully drained. We decided it was time to go, and we did in a hurry. Now frightened and overwhelmed with goosebumps, we headed across the field to the car. We left shocked and awed as we drove back home. Many have explored that house back in the day. I do not know the experiences they had, but that was mine. Cold, uneasy, and nervousness is what I felt. The house has been demolished since then, but some say if you drive Elbow Road late at night where the house once stood, you can still see what resembles windows with the light on in the barren field where the house once stood. And this is not the only haunt on Elbow Road. Let me tell you of the little girl who drowned in the nearby lake. I have not experienced this haunt yet because I never tried it. In itself, it is dangerous to do just because of the road design. It is said if you drive your car down Elbow Road late at night and park it, a little girl may visit you. They have no name for her, but she apparently drowned in Stumpy Lake. How to make this phenomenon occur is dangerous because there are many blind turns on a road with no lights. You are to park your car and sit on its hood. And you will soon hear a little girl laughing. If you watch the road in front of you while on your hood, you will see wet footprints the size of a child's walk toward you. If you feel safer inside the car, all you need to do is flower your hood or trunk and listen to the laughter. When you feel brave enough, you must get out of your parked car and look where the flour was sprinkled, and you will see a child's handprints on top of your car.